Heading into a holiday weekend because tomorrow we will be off, as I'm assuming and hoping that many of you will be, celebrating this great country as part of Independence Day. And then we will be off, the entire station will, on Friday as well. And gentlemen, we have what we call a doozy lined up to head into the long weekend, right? Eddie Garrison wasting no time in booking a big show for us and plenty of talking points as well. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison, who is I always forget, Eddie, you're the CEO or the president?
I'm the CEO.
You're the CEO of the company. That makes Jimmy Cook the president of Query & Company.
Hello
Jimmy
there.
is wearing is that USA basketball shirt
It
today?
is a USA basketball polo.
Usually
today.
every single thing that you wear has some sort of theme
I'm
for
a
the day.
thematic
I
guy.
figured that out.
I am a thematic guy, yeah.
So the theme for USA basketball would be?
I'll just count down to the Olympics, and as I told you yesterday, I'm wearing different USA-styled stuff throughout the week.
Okay.
So
I'm
wait,
down
you
with
didn't
that.
have the Yankees outfit ready and then the USA basketball outfit ready?
I could have had the Yankees outfit ready, Eddie, but I thought you might find that divisive, so I just decided USA basketball was more a thing of unity, something this country needs.
Oh,
you know?
I thought you just came to the acceptance once Ellie De La Cruz hit the home run that the
Bringing
Yankees weren't
people
ready.
together is what we're
Okay.
trying to do. I want to begin with this, and there's plenty to talk about today. Obviously, last night, the Indiana Fever out in Las Vegas game did not go as expected, and I shouldn't say that, or as you had hoped is probably a better way of saying it. But there is good and exciting news about the Fever. We'll get into that with not one, not two, but three members of the franchise being named as WNBA All-Stars. Debbie Antonelli is going to join us in the 2 o'clock hour to talk about the Fever. We also have NBA news to get to. That includes some kind of floating stories out there of rumors that teams are making calls to Kevin Pritchard, interested in a couple pieces for Indiana, and Indiana saying, we're good, which I kind of like. Alexander Rossi, who we know yesterday was in the news because the 9-year IndyCar veteran announced yesterday that this will be in year number 2, his final year with Arrow McLaren. He essentially will become a free agent. Not essentially, he will become a free agent unless something is signed and sealed for him between now and the end of the season. He's going to finish the season with Arrow McLaren, where he currently sits 7th in points, but a lot of question marks about his future. He's going to join us coming up about 25 minutes from now. That was originally going to be 2:30, and then he reached out and said, hey, you know what, something popped up. Can we do 12:30? I said, absolutely. So he's going to join us about 25 minutes from now, and we should mention off the top, because it is a story that I have mentioned several times over the last week, so we want to give the update on it. I guess good news, bad news, if you will. The most important news is in the story involving former Colt Daniel Muir, his wife, and their 14-year-old son, I believe Bryson is the son's name, who within the last week, if you are unfamiliar with it, Bryson's grandmother, he had been visiting his grandmother in Cleveland. He had physical signs of having been abused. His grandmother had concern about it, called the police. A car was pulled over that had Daniel Muir in it, along with a few other people, but Bryson Muir was not in the car. That set off I guess it would have been an amber alert or a silver alert, but either way, a notification of trying to find his whereabouts. He was found today on the compound where Daniel Muir lives in Logansport. It is a religious group that owns the compound. Former Indianapolis Colt Robert Mathis, his name has been linked to not only that particular organization, but also there is unconfirmed report that he was on the property today in terms of Robert Mathis, but his name is not linked in terms of any of the legality of all of it. But Daniel Muir was arrested, charged with obstruction of justice, charged with domestic battery. His wife was also charged with an obstruction charge. And they are, I don't know if they've been released, but as of earlier today, they were in custody. The police photos have been released. But the good news is, and that's the number one priority of the story, the good news is that the son was found to be safe and is now in the custody, apparently, or been turned over to Child Protection Services. So that's the latest story in terms of that situation. Jimmy, last night, another gorgeous night today, and tomorrow is supposed to be a little sketchy, but and we're landlocked, but I think it's actually still gray outside. But did you do anything fun last night?
Nothing too crazy. Watched a little bit here and there of the Fever Aces game as they're able to, as we kind of mentioned at the top, be once again a part of history. It's been a wild. We know that the Fever themselves have playoff ambition and they are a growing, strong team, but it's often been labeled at times a traveling circus because of just the crowds and just the chaos and the fanfare that arrives with Caitlin Clark in the WNBA, and that's no stranger to that last night, setting a record at T-Mobile Arena for attendance, the sellout crowd. I think it's the largest regular season game for the WNBA since like 1999. So that atmosphere, once again, was pretty cool, even though the Fever don't get the result. And then, Jake, I've told you this before, but we're a game show family. Summer of Games on ABC, so a little password last night. Very thrilling stuff. Very thrilling stuff at the Cookhouse. How about you?
I got no problem with password. I'm down with that. What did I do last night? Watch a little of the Fever game, for sure. Shannon has gotten into this, and I don't know if it's current. But and listen, I'm just going to go ahead and outwardly declare that I watched this. And initially, and you pick and choose your battles, right? So we watched the Fever game. My cousin actually works for the Las Vegas Aces, so
That's cool.
Had messaged like, "Hey, are you at the game?" And so then I was watching it, and obviously we know that the good news for the Fever last night, and the reason to celebrate, I guess, is that it is cool that Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, Caitlin Clark all named to the WNBA All-Star game. So congratulations there. Caitlin Clark, a ton of votes, by the way, but well-deserved. And for Aaliyah Boston in particular, kind of hitting her stride now,
Yeah.
I think she's already an established star. But for Kelsey Mitchell, very cool that she's going to be on the team. But typically, if I arrive later and Shannon has already gotten control of the remote control, I'm at the mercy of the Real Housewives of whatever county,
Sure.
which is just garbage. And it's the same thing every time. And I'm always like, can we change this, please? Oh, hold on. They're getting ready to argue. And I'm like, how do you know that? They previewed it. And they're masterful. It's like watching for the weather forecasts on the local news. They keep saying like, da-da-da-da, and coming up in 10 minutes, we'll tell you more. And then you got to stick around.
Yeah.
Kind of like The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, Jake.
Very similar. But she's gotten off of that. And then the new thing that she is on, and so just through osmosis, I started watching it, and then I have to admit I got a little bit, and I have no idea if we're watching something 7 years old or current.
Okay.
But I think it's Netflix documentary or whatever you want to call it on reality show on the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders.
I've heard about that one, but I've not seen it.
It could be a rerun. There's that possibility, but it could. I think they did bring it back this year.
So
don't ask me how I know.
All I know is this: there's one cheerleader girl who is like marrying her high school sweetheart, and I think they're both like probably in their early 20s. And this guy is if there's one of like 7 people who've ever watched this program that are listening to me right now, they know what I'm talking about. This guy is the greatest example of outkick your coverage of all time. Of all time.
Are you talking about yourself or are you talking about this guy?
Well, both. But this guy looks like Howdy Doody. And literally, I mean, I don't even know how to explain it. And yet he's married to a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. But the two of them watching them is like watching an 8th grade couple.
I don't mean to be psychiatric about love, but do they happen to say what the Howdy Doody fellow does for a living? Has that been revealed yet?
Excellent question. That was revealed last night, Jimmy. Thank you for diving into that. He works at a power washing company.
Wow.
She when they interviewed the cheerleader, she said, she's like, I'm not sure exactly what he does. And then she's like, but I know he's in sales and he's got a really important job, and it showed him, and he works at like some company, like a company where you go if you own tractor equipment and you need to get it hosed down. And he was working by himself, and like not one person came in.
Sounds like he went to the Alanis Morissette concert.
But now, another discussion about that. Now, do you say Alanis or Alanis Morissette?
I always thought it was Alanis.
What do you go with, Jimmy?
Alanis Morissette.
I always thought it was Alanis.
You say Alanis.
Yeah.
You say Alanis.
Yes.
Apparently it's Alanis. I'm Team Alanis.
All right.
I've always found it to be Alanis Morissette, all the way back to when she was on You Can't Do That on Television, which most people probably are unaware of. But for what it's worth. Hey, Jake, there could be worse things to watch. That's true. I mean, I'm watching the. Now, there was one where they were. I made Shannon rewind it. They were dressing the Dallas, like measuring them for their little outfits.
Oh yeah.
And the woman that's in charge of it was fitting the shorts for one of the gals.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, there's a little sleight of hand going on here. And we rewound. Shannon's like, no, quit being. And then she rewound it, and she's like, okay, you might actually be right. Oh yeah, I might actually be right.
Unrelated, but still in the sports realm. Did you happen to see? I didn't get a chance to ask this on Monday because I was out. Did you see your beloved Sphere turned into a Mecca draft center
that was
with
fantastic.
the NHL? And if you didn't, you should look up a clip or two because I'm now on board for all drafts being in the Sphere.
That would be awesome.
It was cool.
The graphics were like just across the board awesome. When there was a trade, when the pick was announced. I mean, you've been to the Sphere. That's why I asked you, because you at least have some firsthand experience.
Well, the thing about the Sphere is this: that would be perfect. Number one, because, and for those that are unfamiliar, the Sphere is owned by James Dolan, who owns the New York Knicks. So you would think the NBA would be natural. He owns the New York Rangers as well,
right.
So that would make sense. The Sphere in Las Vegas is exactly that. It is a perfect round. I mean, it's a cylindrical auditorium, if you will, where when you go in, it looks not unlike, say, Clues Hall, but it's only 2 levels. It seats like 20,000 people, but the wall, the structure of the Sphere itself, the walls all the way up to the very top of the ceiling, all the way around are a screen, a high-def screen, and I'm talking high-def screen. I mean, it is truly amazing. It's a multi-billion, that's with a B, multi-billion-dollar facility to build. It is amazing. And what is amazing about it is when you're there and you're sitting in the seats looking out across the way, the stage is kind of down below you, but you're looking actually, it's like looking at the world's largest movie theater screen, except for that it's all-encompassing surrounding you, essentially. The biggest thing to me is and part of this is because it's brand new, it is absolutely, Jimmy, totally state-of-the-art. I mean, the escalators to the water fountains to the carpeting, I mean, it's new, right? But every single thing about it was like, wow, this just feels like an ambiance unlike any other venue I've ever been in. It would be awesome to do like the NFL. The NFL draft would be amazing because I don't know how you fit 20 million people in a 20,000-seat venue, but they'll get it done. NBA also, I mean, it would be very, very cool. So how many of the picks were there?
Just the first round was done at the Sphere.
But how many?
Were you asking players? I don't.
Yeah, how
I
many
don't
were
know
like
the
in the
direct
green room?
answer to that.
All
Eddie,
of
do you
them.
know?
I think all of them that were in the first round were there.
I just sent you on Twitter X 2 collages of pictures from the draft, just for you to get a.
My understanding
point.
is the reason that for the NHL draft that they had to do that was the first one they did with this is because they needed a screen behind them big enough for the last names of some of the
that
players
makes
selected.
Sense, yeah.
And so that's why they went with that, right?
It did look like, again, all I've seen is the stuff you showed us from the Sphere and then the footage and clips from this draft. That's my only reference point for the Sphere, but it looked awesome. And a lot of reporters on NHL beats and some just, columnists were talking about how the NBA and the NFL likely regret not having utilized the Sphere yet, because it was awesome. Like, it was... I mean, you could speak to it, Eddie. Like, you saw when the trade came in, they'd have a puck fly in and just like shatter and show trade alert. It was all. It was all awesome.
I think the one thing though, if the NFL wanted to adopt that and follow the NHL thing here, they can't have 300 million fans.
That's what he was saying, right? You got.
Here's the problem. To be honest with you, the challenge now is going to be if the NFL or anywhere else actually wants to appear to be following suit.
Sure.
And additionally,
because they were the first to do it, right?
Correct.
What makes the NHL draft so much different? What makes it so different from the NBA, NFL is that all the executives and decision makers from each of these franchises are there in the Sphere, and you don't call the player up ahead of time. You get the raw, authentic reaction of, whomever, the coach, the GM, a player, or whatever, going up onto the stage, making the selection, and then the cameras cut to that player, and you're like. And they get all excited. One guy goes, "Holy F," because he was not expecting to be picked. I think it was like 3rd overall.
Which is pretty cool, right? Especially if you can get the F-bomb on the Sphere sound, because it's absolutely... Now, on the outside, could you sit outside the Sphere and see it? Because the outside of the Sphere is also a screen.
So I'm looking at, let's see, who is this from? This is from KSL Sports, which is coverage of Utah sports as a whole. And they have pictures on there from the 28th of June. that highlights it, Jake. I'll show you. This is great for the audience, but it looks like they did utilize some of the exterior of the sphere to put those same graphics, but it's a different element to your point when you're sitting down somewhere in the sphere because you're looking up at kind of this massive arch of, like, they showed the Seattle skyline with a Kraken on top of it, like all kinds of just crazy budget CGI, all that fun stuff.
That's right.
Eddie was camped out for that, right?
He was ready. So,
They wanted to put it in the sphere to be able to accommodate the huge surging Utah fan base, right?
That's what I had heard too.
Yeah.
The Utah Hockey Club?
Now are they going to go by Coyotes?
No, the Utah Hockey Club right now.
I mean,
that's what they're going by.
That's actually kind of cool. Now you realize that if this were a different sport, they'd be the Utah Football Club, which would be UFC, and then they'd all just be out there with no rules, beating each other, right?
Yeah,
that could be a good brand.
That'd be
important
awesome
for that sport.
Let's get to this in the NBA. There are a couple of stories out there. Tony East is one that I think initially picked this up and did a column on it late yesterday. It's no surprise. But if I told you Eddie Garrison, without having had you looked, which I'm sure you did, but if you had to guess, the two players on the Pacers roster that have the combination of availability and at the same time interest level. In other words, it goes without saying that if Kevin Pritchard put a posting on NBA Craigslist saying fire sale, come and get whoever you want, that Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam would be the first two. I mean, that goes without saying.
Uh-huh.
So of those that could theoretically be available to at least have a call fielded,
okay,
and at the same time be those that teams might have interest. Like, if I told you Oscar Tshiebwe was on the market, how many people are making that call? I don't know. But if you had to combine those two aspects, the two players that most likely would make sense in that headline had you not seen it would be who?
Ben Shepherd. I don't know. My immediate thought went to Toppin, but they just signed him. But for the case of the exercise, Nembhard.
Okay, those are two very. Now, if those two were off the board, Jimmy, you would say who?
Mathurin and Turner.
Mathurin and Jarris Walker are apparently the answer. Those are the two that they have received calls regarding. And
I want to clarify also one thing on the Turner part of that, because I know he's been involved in so many trade rumors throughout his entire career. I'm not saying that like as they need to move on from Miles. I'm saying that Miles is such a good piece. I would think he's still at the top of mind for teams that are wanting to upgrade. But that makes sense that Walker would be there too.
The Pacers can't negotiate a contract with Turner until after the season, and
contract
still
year, right?
Correct. And he would become an unrestricted free agent, so he would hit the open market if he does not agree to a contract.
And that's
with the
going to be, the reality with Miles Turner. Before we get to the conversation about Walker and Mathurin, and by the way, Alexander Rossi in about 12 minutes here. The interesting thing about Turner, I don't think this is the case or going to be the case, but the reality is that they have. So James Wiseman, who they kind of quietly signed yesterday, the former number 2 pick in the draft. And he hasn't really found, obviously, a home in the NBA. But he's only, 23 or 24 years old?
Years old, yep.
I mean, it feels like he is 40. But if there's any chance that they can, and this has happened before, where change of scenery for a guy suddenly awakens something, although in his case, he's had change of scenery.
Well, but it was Detroit.
Fair.
You went from Golden State, where you were projected to be a part of a championship run again, and then you get sent off to Detroit because of injury.
So the question becomes, I think this is a 10% chance, but can he show enough life and enough competency that you then are comfortable as an insurance policy if you can't come to terms with Miles Turner, or you need to shift money that initially you had kind of set aside for Miles Turner by securing, say, Nembhard, or if Mathurin has a really good year and you want to secure him long-term, does that allow you the flexibility if you say we now are comfortable enough elevating Isaiah Jackson with Wiseman now becoming the new Isaiah Jackson and allowing Miles Turner to go? I think that's a smaller percentage chance, but I think you always have to have a plan B or a secondary plan in motion in case, in fact, Miles Turner gets to the point where he plays himself either A, out of, which that's not going to happen, the desire to have him, or B, he outprices, he plays to the point where he outprices what you can give him, and somebody else comes in and sweeps him into a big-time deal. Because Turner is probably set at the end of next year to make a lot of money, and the Pacers have to weigh that out. But now they look at whether or not Wiseman gives them – they're going to have a year to figure that out.
I would like to add here, before, Jimmy, you interject, James Wiseman is now the only center under contract after this season. Isaiah Jackson, also a free agent, after the 24-25 season.
Is he restricted or unrestricted?
He would be restricted.
That helps a little bit. I do like Isaiah Jackson.
There's two things with me on the Turner-Isaiah Jackson conversation here. First is that, Jake, you're right. Turner's going to get paid in some capacity. I mean, he's only taken up 14% of the Pacers' cap as it stands. He's still just 28 years old, and he's a valuable stretch big that matters a great deal for a plethora of systems around the NBA. There's plenty of teams that would make a call to try to acquire Miles Turner. That said, at least from Turner's camp and what he said throughout all of the rumors of him maybe being on the move, or should they part ways with him, or where's the proper fit for him, it appears to be a high-level, amicable, mutual relationship and respect between both the Pacers front office and Turner, to the point that I wouldn't be surprised if at season's end it was a very quick first day of free agency type of get a deal done type of thing. But the Isaiah Jackson of it all is interesting to me. And I understand that with Jackson, he's also only 23 years old. And it's not fair necessarily to judge him solely on 1 year of basketball. But there were times, and maybe this is just me getting caught up in semantics, you tell me, there were times where I had the same feelings with Jackson that I did Jalen Smith, where in the playoffs, it felt like the minutes came down up until Halliburton got hurt. I mean, he finishes with 17 minutes in that loss to the Celtics in Game 4. But 7 minutes a night, 4 minutes a night, 5 minutes a night. And I went back and looked, and that's not completely out of the realm of what he had during stretches during the regular season, but it felt like during the playoffs that when they tightened that rotation, Jackson was still one of those names that got squeezed. He still got a couple of minutes. He wasn't Jalen Smith frozen out of the lineup.
Right.
But it felt like that happened to him. Was that just because the Pacers trusted their first 7 or 8 guys more so than Jackson at this stage of his career, and it was just a tough decision that had to be made? Or was it they didn't trust him for more extended minutes in the playoffs?
That's a great question, because he did. Jackson, to me, is fascinating because his minutes are feast or famine.
Mm-hmm.
He either is, you know what, go ahead and take the night off and you can go to the mall and hang out, or we're going to use you a lot. But when his number's called, I think he's been really good.
Sure. I would agree with that.
Now, in the case of like Walker, for example, along those lines, it feels like Walker, his minute indoctrination is going to be similar to that of Jackson, where I don't think all of a sudden Jarris Walker is going to be part of the, just Ben Shepherd, where you look up and you say, wow, this guy's, they can't keep him off the floor. It feels like Walker's minutes are also going to be kind of spot, at times heavy, at times non-existent. And Jimmy, when it comes to Jarris Walker, to me, what's fascinating is one of two. I'm going to go back to what I've said all along. One of two things is true here. Either they saw through the course of this past season that this is a player who is really raw and has a really long way to go because he's young, and maybe they even think to themselves, man, would we have been better taking A, B, or C last year in the lottery? I'm strictly saying this as an option of the correct answer.
Sure.
I don't think that's the correct answer. I think the correct answer truly is now, and I think now we have seen enough to know this, that Jarris Walker is one that they say, oh no, he can be a centerpiece for us, but fortunately right now the roster is such that we don't need him to be that just yet, but we're going to be patient with it because this is definitely something we want to hold on to. And I think now we have enough evidence to say that that's accurate, because it does appear as though there have been a few calls made. There's been some inquiry. And in fact, not only is he still around, now the question becomes, where exactly does he slot into the rotation, into minutes? Because it's stacked, and you wonder how many minutes he's going to get. And to your point, Jimmy, it could look kind of like Isaiah Jackson's minutes did of yesteryear. Alexander Rossi, the news came out yesterday that year number 2 with Arrow McLaren will be his final. That is this season. He is 7th in points. He's in his 9th season in IndyCar. And now the question becomes, where does he go for the 10th? We'll ask him that, amongst other things, and we'll do it on the other side. Rolling along on a Wednesday that feels like a Friday. Tomorrow, Independence Day. Friday, we will not be on the air. And then IndyCar Mid-Ohio this weekend. One of the big storylines will be the fact that our next guest, who is racing in his 9th season in the NTT IndyCar Series, will not be returning next year to the team with which he'll be running at Mid-Ohio. Talking about Alexander Rossi, the 2016 Indy 500 champion, currently 7th in points and with Arrow McLaren. But the news comes out yesterday that he will be a free agent, essentially, at the end of the year. He joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Alexander, first, thank you for joining us. How are you?
No problem, man. Doing well. How about yourself?
No complaints. Obviously ready for what should be a fun weekend. And I know for you, there's a lot that goes into that and with that. You've been a major talking point within the series in the last day, clearly. So let's go back to this. Take me through kind of the timeline of when this particular change of you moving on from Arrow McLaren and vice versa took place, and just the overall process of how that all came to be.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this was all kind of much the direction that we knew was going to happen Thursday going into Laguna. And then it was pretty much official the Tuesday after Laguna. And I would say that was the conclusion of, I don't know, a good 4 weeks of back and forth of, looking at an extension and what that would potentially look like and all of the factors that go into that. And ultimately this ended up being pretty much a business decision by both parties, I guess. And there's been a lot of negative driver news in IndyCar as of late, and this is not one of those stories. It was just, I think people often forget that this is as much of a business as it is a sport. And, that was kind of the end of the road in terms of how negotiations went, and we couldn't really find common ground, and that's where we are today. So it's not the end of the world, but certainly a change for next year.
To clarify this, if you had so chosen that you wanted to stay with Arrow McLaren for next year, that option was there for you, correct?
There was an offer on the table, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then along those lines, for next year, and I think that there are a number of teams that one would assume, especially with, a new team coming in that's going to run Chevrolet next year. Your name's been linked to that. Can you definitively say that you'll be racing IndyCar next year?
Yes, I will be racing IndyCar next year. What that looks like, TBD, and I'm not just saying that because you're the media, but I don't know, to be honest. There's a couple of different irons in the fire and a couple of things that we're evaluating and trying to figure out and just see what ticks all of the boxes or the majority of the boxes for what I'm looking for going forward. And first and foremost, that's a competitive car and a team that has the capability to go out there and win races and, give me another shot to drink some milk in May.
Let me give you, Alexander Rossi, an outsider perspective, and then you tell me if there's any validity to it, okay?
Okay.
I think the outside perspective from people, at least a growing perspective, is, wow, McLaren is, tradition-laden, historic team, competitive team, great sponsorship, great activation, and competitive because you've been consistent. You're 7th in points, like I mentioned, and you've got 3 top 5s this year. But the rotation of contracts and seats and the drivers around it creates a mayhem that would be difficult to contend with when running for that team. Fact or fiction?
Fiction, honestly. I think that a lot of what has gone on for the organization over the past, really since I've been involved, right, has been pretty chaotic with everything that went down with Alex and his kind of back and forth, and then seemingly finding, some stability with David in the 6 car. And then obviously he had the very unfortunate mountain biking accident, and that created a lot of chaos for management. And those were all things that were out of their control. I sympathize with them a lot. because they didn't ask for really any of that to be presented to them, and that's kind of just the hand they were dealt. But from a week in and week out ability to effectively show up to a racetrack and feel that you have the tools and the people and the equipment to go execute and everything, none of the kind of noise around all of that really changed what we were doing. So that by no means was any sort of influence or factor in this decision.
Alexander Rossi is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Alexander, how would you mention your overall feelings and mindset towards looking for a new team next year? I know you still have, you'll still finish out this season, but you mentioned it seems like a mutual, amicable split. Is it bittersweet for you, or are you excited about this process of finding a new home? What overall is your mindset once the season ends?
Both actually. Very excited about the next chapter. I think there's a pretty there's some pretty cool opportunities that have presented themselves. But then on the other side of that, these people that you work with and race with, they become a huge part of your life, and you develop really strong relationships and friendships with them. So it's sad when it's going to end. But then on the flip side to that, we're just entering the second half of the season. We've certainly turned a corner on the 7 car in terms of being able to be in a place where we want to be. There was a lot of growth and teething issues in 2023 on the 7 car side, just with the addition of another car and everything that comes along with that. And really things have been trending in a really strong direction for the past couple of months, really. And so I'm just excited about the opportunity that we have in the second half of the season. I think we have every ability to, as a team, put 2 cars in the top 5 in the championship. And that's our goal. And I think that's very feasible. And it's something that is really the main focus now that all of this has gone away. Like, there's been no change in the approach of what we're doing. Like, I was doing a test for the team yesterday in St. Louis. It was me and a Penske car. So just because all of this has come out that I'm not coming back next year, it has not affected what we're doing in terms of preparation for the second half of the season and what we think we can accomplish.
In terms of contract negotiations and team movement, Christian Lundgaard, it was announced also now, will be with Arrow McLaren next year, and presume, in the seat that you're vacating.
Yeah.
Are you aware of when you are going through that process, are you also aware of other drivers they're talking to, or is that kept away from your standpoint until you definitively don't come to an agreement and then boom, plan B comes to fruition?
I don't think you're ever explicitly told, because it's not the team's responsibility to tell you who they're talking to. But, Christian was a free agent. Everyone kind of knows whose contract is up and when they're up and all this sort of thing. So you knew that him and I were kind of, once Joseph was settled and renewed with Penske, it was kind of him and I who were next up on the list. So I didn't have to be told to kind of know that, if we weren't going to be able to do something, that he was the logical guy, because he's, at the top of the list from a free agency standpoint.
Who's your best friend within the series that's a full-time driver?
Best friend in the series, probably Colton.
Okay. So
yeah,
somebody that was a teammate and is now a competitor. So does that kind of give you, I don't know how to word it this way, but does that ease, I guess, or make you kind of more conditioned to the thought of next year being away from a team with which you had worked because you've been through it before? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's not a stressful thing to think about. It's the fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, thing about IndyCar is like the off season's incredibly long, right? Once we finish here in 2 months in Nashville, like, it's going to be 6 months before we're racing again. So that gives you a lot of time to build up the relationships in the new place that you're at. What it doesn't give you, obviously, is the ability to, test theories and to try and understand how to get the most out of each other. And that does take time, as we're obviously seeing, this year for me in the 7 car. So, no, a new environment is not worrisome. Just the only thing is, you have to be very aware of the fact that it's not often plug and play, right? I mean, it takes a little bit of time for people to find their feet in a new organization. That being said, I've driven for, 2 of the top teams in IndyCar in my mind. I've driven for both engine manufacturers. So the experience that I have, coming out of what will be 2024 versus what I had coming out of 2022 with Andretti and Honda, it'll be very different, right? I've seen a whole different approach and methodology and way of doing things. I've seen, both sides of the coin from an engine manufacturer standpoint. So I view myself as actually a much more well-rounded driver and a more complete driver now than I was 2 years ago. So I think that'll help the adaptation process.
You were, Alexander Rossi, kind of you were a face of Honda, quite frankly, when you came over and you were running with Andretti and you won the Indianapolis 500. Now, of course, as you mentioned, driving for Chevrolet, I've seen a video every time I go on social media. There's a video of you in a driverless Chevrolet car promotion that's going out there. So does that factor into determining where you're going to go next in terms of engine manufacturer now that you've been with both?
Not really. I think both manufacturers have gone away from the model of financially supporting drivers. That used to be something that existed kind of pre-2020-ish. And then from a performance standpoint, they both have their strengths and weaknesses. And I think I don't need to tell you what those are, right? It's obvious that Chevy is incredibly strong at the Speedway, and they really have continued to push the envelope there in a very impressive way. And then kind of the tighter, slower courses like your Detroits, for example, Honda has the edge. But I think that it's very close between the two. And I also think that obviously this offseason, both are going to be working on their respective weaknesses. So it's not a make or break situation, kind of what manufacturer you end up at, because the parity between the two is so good.
Alexander Rossi joins us via the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Alexander, it's been well documented over the last couple of months, but this coming weekend at Mid-Ohio, it's going to be the debut of the hybrid engine that IndyCar, Chevrolet, and Honda both kind of collabed on. From a driver standpoint and a viewer's standpoint, for those of us watching at home, what, if any, noticeable differences will there be?
Oh, you want the honest answer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
None.
Okay.
All right, then.
Yeah.
Now, what about from the driver's standpoint? Feel for it, weight, balance, etc.
I mean, that's a hard question to answer going into Mid-Ohio because Mid-Ohio has been repaved. So how it stacks up compared to last year's Mid-Ohio is going to be an unknown quantity. I think Toronto will give you a clearer picture of what difference is the hybrid actually making? Because with repaves and what we've seen with Road America and Laguna these past 2 years, it's an increase of anywhere from 4 to 7% track grip. So I think regardless of the hybrid, people are going to be relearning Mid-Ohio to a certain standpoint in terms of car setup and what you can get away with. The reason I say the audience won't really notice it is just because it's not a system that on a road course will make or break somebody's day. There's not enough of a performance delta. You'll obviously use it because it's something, but it's not going to allow a car behind to pass a car in front. Not going to, if someone makes a mistake exiting turn one, if you deploy all the energy you have, it's not like it's going to keep you in front of a car, if that sort of thing makes sense. Now, certainly there is a lot of systems to manage now from the driver's standpoint, and if you start to mess that up, then it can negatively affect the balance of the car in a pretty big way, and so then it'll start to affect lap times and stuff. But from the pure usage standpoint of okay, I'm going to deploy all my energy versus not, you're not going to see any difference.
In terms of any differences there might be between the engines, and I'm just going to spitball two that at least from the outside at Indy were noticeable, and that is, maybe Chevy had more straightaway breakaway speed. Honda might have been a little more fuel efficient. Did those disparities now shrink? Has everything kind of come to the middle because of the new hybrid engine?
No. I think all of that is still the same. I think, and the reason for that is because, the reason the system was delayed, and rightfully so, was because the reliability wasn't there yet, kind of in March when the first race of the season was. And so we've gone through a lot of testing. We have been one of the 4 teams that have done a lot of the R&D on this system. And the way currently that it is designed to be reliable is pretty low torque. And that's both on a deployment standpoint and on a regen standpoint. And that's why the difference in terms of performance isn't that high. Now, as that gets ramped up at some point, which we don't know when, then I think you'll start to see more disparity exist or less disparity exist between manufacturers, because teams will be able to use the hybrid to fill holes that they previously had. But right now, it's just not a powerful enough system to really change anything.
Do you feel uncertain right now, or do you feel relieved?
About what?
Your status as a driver in the IndyCar Series and next year, or do you have a definitive place where you're like, I'm good because I've got a pretty good idea where I'm going to land, and I'm excited for that? I
am of the latter. I don't know what it is yet. I know it's going to be one of a couple things. And so I wouldn't say I'm relieved.
Now, can you tell us the couple things?
I cannot, no. I wouldn't say I'm relieved, because that's not a fair statement about Arrow McLaren, but I'm not stressed about the future.
So in conclusion, because I think this is fair to point out, because they've been good to us as well, certainly through the month of May, done some fun things. This is not a situation where there is a bad blood or an ill feeling between you and the team, but rather just a business thing where handshake and move on. Is that fair to say?
100%. Yeah, there's been nothing but positive conversations between Zach and I and Tony and I through this whole process, and it's not just a press line that this was a mutual separation. It's real. I think there's people that are sad about it, and it's something that just happens in this sport, happens in life sometimes, and we're going to do everything we can to finish on a high note and win some races for the team and our partners.
And that quest begins this weekend at Mid-Ohio. You, of course, can hear that race right here on this radio station, as well as viewing it on the NBC television networks, which will become Fox next year. Alexander Rossi, 7th in points. Again, 3 top 5s on the year, hoping to add to that total starting at Mid-Ohio. Appreciate the time. I know it's been a flurry, so to get back and to be able to come on is much appreciated, and we will see you this weekend.
No problem at all. Thanks, guys, for your time. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Again, Alexander Rossi. For now, Arrow McLaren, and we will see where he lands next year. Stephen Holder, by the way, going to join us top of the hour about 10 minutes from now. Appreciate the candor from Alexander Rossi. I think a lot of things answered there. We will get that up in the Eddie that will be available for people to listen when and where.
On the Podcast Center, but if you follow us on Twitter at query_company, I will have it out there shortly, and that's where you can find the link. Podcast Center on 1075thefan.com, by the way.
1075thefan.com. If you're just joining us, there is some news involving, thank you, a former Colt. We will kind of relay that out. The good news is that the son of Daniel Muir was found and found safely. But Stephen Holder is going to join us from ESPN, not necessarily to talk about that story, although I imagine that we will see if he has any more or new information on that, but the latest on the horseshoe coming up top of the hour, which means within the next 5 minutes. Man, this is one of my favorites in terms of American theme songs from the jazz singer Neil Diamond. I don't know if you know this or not. He was Neil Cole until middle school, and the pressure got to him. Come on, Eddie. Come on. Come on.
Oh.
Did you not give me a drum roll on that one?
We need-
Or a
No.
We need a cricket, I think, for Eddie to utilize in those situations.
Eddie reached over like he was
he
about to hit
did.
it.
He
because
faked you out.
Deep down, Eddie was thinking to himself, that's pretty solid.
No.
Pretty solid. No, I think he was. Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Of course, he is a regular on this station, as well as his writings at ESPN, Stephen Holder, talking about the Indianapolis Colts. And, Stephen, I'm going to lead with the story that is not of the current installment of the Indianapolis Colts, but that of a former Colt and Daniel Muir. I don't know, so I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot, how much you have had to or either professionally or just personally followed this story. But what we now know is that his son, who there was concern over his son's safety, has been recovered by authorities in Logansport, and Muir and his wife have been charged each with obstruction of justice and Daniel Muir with domestic battery. There are differing reports as to other people that might have been on the property when the authorities were able to seize through in Logansport and get Daniel Muir's son. But having said all of that, if there's anything other than that that you're aware, let me know, or how much have you had to follow said story?
So I've been on vacation, so I haven't reported on it, but I have definitely followed the story the past week or so. When I first heard about it, it immediately struck a chord with me because I am familiar with what has been, what's been going on with the, I don't know what we even call it, right? The compound, I guess, that they have up there in Logansport. I'm familiar with it. I know a little bit about, that situation, his involvement, Dan Muir's involvement, Robert Mathis's involvement, obviously. I don't have any details to add on this, but I was definitely, it definitely caught my attention when the first reports came out, because there's always been just sort of an air of uncertainty about what really goes on up there. And this is an offshoot of something that we learned about quite a few years ago out of Green Bay. For those who may remember the Sports Illustrated article, a series of articles a few years ago about, I believe, Gabazia, I can't pronounce his name, but he's a former defensive end for the Packers. They called him KGB. Does that ring a bell with anybody?
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, because his name is an intricate one, that's the initials that he most commonly went by, yes.
Absolutely cannot pronounce it, so I apologize for even trying. But anyway, he actually is, if I understand correctly, the first NFL figure that kind of got other guys involved in this. Not that it's only, limited to NFL players, but there are some prominent NFL players who have been involved. So those three being the three that I'm aware of. So that story was very troubling. And so having read that story and knowing those details, when I understood there to be a related organization here in Logansport and that these guys were involved, I definitely paid attention to that. So I don't know. It's been an interesting time. I can't allege anything about anybody involved, but there's a lot of mystery and a lot of unanswered questions as well.
Do you believe that, or do you have any reason to believe, I guess I should say, Stephen Holder, Robert Mathis's name has been linked to this? And in defense of Robert Mathis, I will say this, not necessarily because of any recent developments, but rather because he was involved at one point in land purchase of this area in Logansport, and I think was even on record of saying that he had gone up there on several occasions. There's, again, conflicting report as to whether or not he was present today during this entire process. But are there other names that you have heard in any way that involve the Indianapolis Colts or former players of the Colts aside from Robert Mathis?
So to that question, no, I don't know of any other Colts players These are the two that I'm aware of. That doesn't mean there are or are not. I just don't know. So that would be my answer to that. I would say, and as far as Mathis's link to this, I don't know, do we call it a religion or what do we call it? Organization? I don't even know. But his link to this entity, right? He definitely has links to it. And that has been, it's been reported on to a degree, I believe, or at least there's been some links reported on. I don't know that's not a crime, right? It's not against the law to be associated with an organization that has particular beliefs, right? I mean, that's fine. I think there are clearly, though, there's a lot of mystery about what goes on in the organization. And that, I think, was something that I learned from that Sports Illustrated article that I mentioned. There were a lot of questionable things that were happening and people were coming out and talking about as to who was involved in what. That's what's harder to ascertain. And that's why we have to be careful about how we talk about it, because we just don't know enough. But there definitely were there was a lot of smoke. There was definitely some untoward things going on there, behavior toward women and all kinds of things. And I, again, having no knowledge of who was involved in any of that, all I can tell you is that those are the kinds of things that were being alleged.
Joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, he is Stephen Holder, Colts beat writer for ESPN.com. Stephen, it feels like once we cross July, which we have now, 4th of July on the horizon, but not the only thing now on the horizon that you can see clearly, which is, of course, Colts camp. And earlier this week, there was a story on NFL.com, in fact, I think published today, that, as you know, around this time of year, there's aggregation that goes on, there's summary articles, and this one kind of taking into account some media comments that Kwity Paye has made recently in regards to expectations for him this season. We know how important the defensive line and the trenches are going to be for the Colts this season, as much as it was last season, maybe even more so, given the inexperienced nature still of some pieces of that secondary. When you look at this core of Samson Ebukam, DeForest Buckner, of Dio Dangbo, and Kwity Paye, and of course the addition of Leatu Latu, however much playing time gets for him, but Paye specifically, he's mentioned he wants to get north of 10 sacks. That would be a great number for him individually. Based on what's going to be asked of him and his overall growth within Gus Bradley's system, is that attainable, and how much will they rely on Paye to have another career campaign kind of like he did last year?
I do think it's attainable. I actually do. There are going to be a lot of variables, right? Like, for example, if Latu plays all the premium pass rush snaps, for example, that's going to eat into snaps that Kwity Paye would get in those situations. So that could impact him negatively in terms of production. So, but in a perfect world, yes, it is possible. I mean, Kwity Paye has increased his sack numbers each year so far. He's gone up by a couple of sacks in each of his 3 seasons already to a career high 8.5 last year. So he also, by the way, played, I believe, 16 games last season, which was, I think, a career high as well. So that's going to be part of it, right? He hasn't had like major injury problems, but he is a guy who has always had kind of a nagging injury that he's playing through and has missed a game here and there, less than 100%. So last year I thought that's probably the healthiest we have seen him, and the production was there. I mean, I thought that was a jump for him. Whether or not we can have total agreement on what his future is, that being a separate matter, it's undeniable to say that, at least when I watched him, that last year he took a step forward, right? So if he continues to do that, then you really have something there. And so that's the question: does he continue to take steps? I don't think he's ever going to be this sort of, freaky, sort of twitchy pass rusher. That's not what he is, and I think it's okay to accept that. We can't judge people by what we want them to be or what we hoped they would be. That's not the player that he is. Okay, so that's okay. He's a guy who is a tough run defender. He's definitely a play through the whistle kind of pass rusher. That's a good thing. Those guys tend to get sacks that maybe they shouldn't get sometimes because they keep playing, and they're going to get that second effort sack from time to time. And he's just got the toughness that you really want on your defense. So there's really no downside to having Kwity Paye on your team. The question is going to be, can he take a step toward being that upper echelon defensive end? I don't know that. I do think the 10 sacks is possible, but that doesn't mean that you're an elite defensive end. It just means you got a little production. I do think, though, he is a very good all-around player. And, again, the kind of player that I would want on my team, all things being equal. Obviously, money and all those things come into play. But all things being equal, I want a guy like that on my team. He's going to play the run. He's going to play his responsibilities, set the edge. I know that's not sexy, but it's important. So I'm looking forward to see what he can do this year. And the other thing I would say, I put this in the situation or in the category a little bit of like Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell in that there's motivation. Everybody's got to perform because you've got to earn your snaps this year. So that's never a bad thing either. If you're from a fan's perspective, that's kind of what you'd want.
By the way, Stephen, I don't know if you know this about myself. I'm both sexy and important, just so you know.
Well, I mean, look, not everybody can have it all. But, that's the thing. That's the thing. So,
Thank you.
I mean, I know Kwity Paye aspires to be you, really, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
I
So,
appreciate
there you
that. Hey, so much focus will be Stephen Holder of ESPN.com, our guest. So much focus once camp gets underway here in, hard to believe at the end of the month, but that Anthony Richardson's health. But we're overlooking who? Give me a player or two that we have forgotten about, if there is one, that we've forgotten is also either coming off injury or an off-season rehabilitation that is worth keeping an eye on that has been overshadowed by the status of Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, okay, well, first of all, you reinforcing that training camp is starting in a couple of weeks makes me a little bit sad.
Well aware, yes.
Yeah. I mean, look, I get it. People are ready for football, but I just got back in town from vacation. Like I'm like in that mode where I'm like, football? No, never heard of it. No. Anyway, I don't think we've forgotten about this guy, but we cannot talk about him enough. And it's Jelani Woods. I mean, it's just completely honest. Jelani Woods is a guy we can't talk about enough. He has to, I think, find that potential that he has. He has to tap into it this year. They did not really do anything at that position, at tight end. So it tells me that they are putting a lot on this guy's shoulders, and frankly, they're doing it with a very small sample size to draw from. So if he flops, I don't anticipate that he does necessarily, but if he flops, that, number one, puts a lot of pressure on the remaining tight ends to step up and find the next level. And it also, I think, puts pressure on the Colts to have to, really find, I think, an impact player at that position going forward. They have good players, but they don't have, sort of a game changer at that position. No one on this roster, in my view, has had that level of impact at tight end. And frankly, we talked about tight end university, I think, a couple of weeks ago, which I was at in Nashville with, Kelsey and all the great tight ends in the league. And I just thought about how many teams were represented there by really, top level tight ends. And frankly, it's like half the league. They have these literal top level tight ends that are very accomplished. And I think the Colts are not one of those teams right now. So they're hoping Jelani Woods can get there. And it's important that he does, because that position now has just become so critical to offense's success. And with a play caller like Shane Steichen, who I think can exploit matchups as well as anybody in the NFL, if you have that at tight end, that's where you get mismatches just about as much as anywhere. So it's critical that Jelani Woods is the guy they hope he is. The other thing I would say, this guy did finish the season on the field, but let's see what we get if Jonathan Taylor can have a healthy season. For one, he hasn't had a healthy offseason for a couple of years, so he's got that, which helps. Last year, we know what happened there. That was obviously a story unto itself. But he's healthy now going into the offseason, which I think is important. And now the key is staying healthy. what we got last season from Jonathan Taylor was a taste of what he can be. And we've known for a long time what he can be because he showed us a couple of years ago. But we haven't seen it since then, 2021. We haven't seen it on a consistent basis because he's had some nicks. So if he can stay healthy, I think that is the key to Taylor becoming sort of a transcendent player, a la Christian McCaffrey, that type of impact. Different players, but that type of impact. If he can do that consistently, now you're talking about him being one of the best players in the NFL. I mean, I think he's probably arguably already there, but it's about the consistency.
Stephen Holder joins us, covers the Colts for ESPN, and he joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Stephen, the other aspect of the Colts season last year that I think got lost because of the Anthony Richardson injury, because of the Jonathan Taylor saga, because of them, still being in the hunt for a playoff spot, was going into last offseason. I remember there still being heavy question marks, heavy concern, a lot of anxiety about the state of the offensive line. And largely, I mean, I know there were situations, but largely I did not think that they were a liability like they were 2 years ago. I know it's hard with, always retirement rumors and all of that potentially down the line, but going into 2024, this group's good, right? Like they're a solid group. There's not a lot of reason to be concerned, or are there still areas that maybe got lost in the shuffle of what last season was without Anthony Richardson?
No, I love the offensive line. I really think that that group has the opportunity to continue to assert itself this year. That's the best thing that Anthony Richardson, I think, has going for him, is that he has, this really reliable offensive line. I think back to C.J. Stroud early last season. I thought the offensive line got settled down later on in Houston. But if you recall the first Colts game in Houston, the Colts teed off on C.J. Stroud, and it was hard to watch at times. Now, he played well in that game despite it, which is why I respect him so much, because he took a lot of hits last year, and it didn't seem to faze him. But once those guys got back, they had some injuries. But you saw, I guess the point that I'm making is that you saw through those first couple of games with him, you saw what impact a tough offensive line play or bad offensive line play can have on a young quarterback. Granted, he rose above it, but man, that was really tough on the kid physically. And he didn't have necessarily the same amount of success as he did when he really got going. It did impact him. So anyway, I do think that's one of the best things that Anthony Richardson has going for him. This line is honestly the two lines, the offensive line and the defensive line, unquestionably the absolute deepest and best parts of this football team. There's no question about it. And I think that's okay. That's a good thing. I know everyone wants to say, oh, we've got the best wide receivers in the NFL. We've got the best defensive backs, whatever. Everyone wants to be able to say those things. But, if you had your druthers, if you had to start a football team from scratch, you're starting with the two lines, right? And so that's where they are most established. And they have obviously supplemented the rest of the roster with some talent in some important places as well. So I love this offensive line. There's one question for me. It's not Ryan Kelly, actually. Even though Ryan Kelly, long-term, I don't know how long he'll play. But Braden Smith, for me, Braden Smith has to stay healthy. His health was a big problem last year. And if he has another sort of injury-plagued season, I hate to say this, but then the Colts now have to start thinking about, okay, what is the long-term outlook here? If he's healthy this year and plays well, then I've got no issues, and I don't think they do either. But it got to a point last year where they were kind of privately thinking to themselves, and I'm talking about internally the Colts, privately thinking like, okay, is this sustainable? And I think he's going to have another shot to right the ship this year. But really with him, it's really just about health. It's not about performance. He's just got to stay healthy.
It is interesting, Stephen, that the Colts did round 4, they went center, right, in Bartolini. Right. And then Goncalves, who they took in the 3rd round, I think is, if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go back and look, but isn't he kind of thought of as like a hybrid security blanket lineman that can play a couple of different spots. Braden Smith's been really good when he's healthy, for sure.
Gonsalves, yeah.
Gonsalves, yes, sir.
He can play just about any spot, yes. So I do think there is some thought that he could be a tackle, yes. Whether that happens immediately, I don't know. And whether he could do it long term, I don't know. That will sort itself out. But they certainly have a potential option there. Blake Freeland, who they drafted last year, he had some tough snaps going up against the likes of Myles Garrett, but like who doesn't? But anyway, look, I wouldn't say he was great last year, but a great learning experience. And a lot of times for offensive linemen, it takes time anyway. So let's see if he can make a jump. He is definitely a tackle option as well. So they have a couple of possibilities there, but the hope is clearly the guy that they're paying, I think, $17 million a year, Braden Smith. They're hoping he comes through and they don't have to worry about him. When he is playing well and is healthy, he's an afterthought in the best kind of way, meaning they don't have to worry about him. Like, they can just put him over there. They don't have to help him with a tight end. They don't do any of that. He just handles his business. When he got that contract extension a couple of years ago, he was great. He had a season a couple of years ago where he went against just an absolute murderer's row of pass rushers who lined up on the defense's left side, like, because a lot more top pass rushers do that today. Whereas before, many years ago, we always talked about the quarterback's blind side, so obviously that left tackle spot became the most important. But more pass rushers started figuring out, well, I can get the easy matchup on the other side, and they became more accustomed to rushing from the defense's left. So that right tackle became critical. And he had a season, Braden Smith, where he got the likes of, just a murderer's row, including Myles Garrett, and he did great that season. He was really impressive. So he has that ability. The question is health, and he's got that knee injury he's coming off of. He hadn't practiced throughout the offseason. He's supposed to be ready for camp, and the hope is that he is the old Braden Smith.
Have we reached a point yet, Steven, where the whole, they're going to bring in a veteran at some point? Like, are we approaching a threshold where maybe they're not, and they're just going to keep what they have, and barring an injury, this is the roster you can expect with the cut downs, of course, but this is largely the personnel you can expect going into the season?
Yeah, I think so. At this point, first of all, anyone who's not on the roster at this point, there are some few exceptions, okay? And there's a couple of safeties out there, for example. But generally, anyone who's not on the roster at this point is probably not somebody you're banging the door down for. Again, there's a couple exceptions. There are some veterans who are holding out, to, I assume, wait and see when injuries pop up and if they get a phone call. But I do think the Colts are taking that approach. They talked about some defensive back possibilities, and they decided to move on for the time being, at least. That doesn't mean they won't do something, but that they had that conversation, I would say, back in early June, and nothing happened, right? So that tells me they were good with it at the time. And whether their opinion changes, I can't say, I can't predict, but I do get the impression that it's more likely the roster you see is largely going to be the roster they start the season with. Obviously, there could be some moves of some kind, but I don't anticipate big moves, at least based on the last conversations they had before the break.
Most importantly, where was vacation?
So we went out flew out to Seattle and drove up to Vancouver, which, if you've never done, I highly, highly recommend.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful,
yes.
Right?
Yes. So if I'm all about like scenic drives if I can do it, right? And so there's the Pacific Coast Highway if you ever have a chance to do that, right? Take that drive one day. So in Vancouver, there's something called the Sea to Sky Highway. It goes from Vancouver up to Whistler, which I think is where the 2010 Winter Olympics were, the downhill skiing and all that. It's a ski resort kind of town.
It kind of looks like that run on 96th Street that goes across Geist, right? Very similar.
Basically, yeah. I mean, every time I'm crossing that bridge over Geist, I think to myself, the people in Vancouver think they've got it good.
That's right.
Let me tell you.
Hey,
Vancouver Harbor's got nothing on this.
Stephen, when you drive that area, the Pacific Northwest, it is amazing, though, how much faster the drive goes because you are literally just looking around the entire time.
No, you're not looking at a cornfield. No, there's no question about it. But anyway, just to put a bow on it, the drive from Vancouver to Whistler is breathtaking. I'm not kidding, breathtaking. I mean, you can stop like 19 times along the way, just to take pictures. There's a couple of like huge waterfalls that you can pull off and check out. I mean, it's pretty breathtaking, man. I can't lie. And by the way,
Seahawks
the city
best
doesn't suck either.
Oh, most cities are great. Seattle, honestly, is this time of year is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. To your point, they have between color scheme and logo, the Seahawks are the best in the NFL. Period. The old Seahawks, the royal blue and silver.
I'm glad
Seahawks.
you said that. I'm glad you said that because that's the only proper answer.
I'm wearing it right now, as a matter of fact. I've got on a Seahawks shirt as we speak, and I didn't even know that's where we were going, Stephen, but much appreciated.
It all works out.
Stephen, enjoy a couple of weeks off, and then it'll be up and running before we know it with Colts training camp getting underway at Grand Park. But we appreciate the time as always, and welcome back to the Circle City.
All right, guys. See you soon.
All right, Stephen Holder, ESPN.com on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. We will switch gears, go from NFL to NBA, talking about the Pacers and some of the moves that have happened in free agency around the association next.
continues. There's no 4th of July Eve, as far as I know, is an official holiday, so you can't say it that way. But the 4th of July, of course, is tomorrow, and we have the nice long extended weekend here.
This is my favorite song, by the way.
It is?
Yeah.
All time. Or in the 4th of July
4th
category.
of July, yeah.
All right.
That would be courtesy of Red, White, and Blue by Toby Keith.
So that is Eddie's nomination. I said mine, I think, off the air, and potentially, if Eddie is so gracious enough to throw it in there at some point, Living in America by James Brown, I think, is my favorite of exclusive lyrics to the USA. Jake, do you have one that...
Well, I mentioned earlier,
fits
mine's
that bill?
America by Neil Diamond.
That's right. Yep. Which we did get to that already. There's been plenty of fireworks across the NBA with free agency having opened up just a couple of days ago. And Jake, I asked this yesterday of Alex Golden. I'm going to ask it here in about a half hour when we talk to Matt Moore of the Action Network, who covers the NBA nationally. But I am good with the Pacers in this run it back philosophy of trying to retain everything that you had as much as you can, knowing that you're going to get upgrades that you don't have to pay for. Those upgrades you don't have to pay for, of course, are, in theory, an improved Bennedict Mathurin, him staying healthy, because he was clearly missed during the postseason. Even though they did make it to the conference finals, there were moments where I found myself saying, man, a player of his caliber that can create his own shot, that would be helpful in situations for this team, you miss him. But not to take away anything that happened. It's just you miss that. You hope he's there. Jarris Walker's the other option, of course, as a young player who was still finding his way in his rookie campaign. Maybe there's a minutes increase there for him. My question, though, for Alex yesterday and to Matt here in a little bit that I propose to you now, I know it's hard from a fan's perspective to sit back and look at the moves that are happening around the league and not get envious or get worried that, oh, the league's passing you by because you're standing pat. This is still a very good Pacers team that, even despite the moves that have happened, I think has a good chance to even improve on what they did a season ago. That said, is there any part of you that looks at what New York just did, that looks at what could be asked of Paul George as the third best player on a team in theory in Philadelphia, that looks at Milwaukee a year further with the chemistry of Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard, that doesn't look around and say, man, this is still a really tough conference, and there's no guarantee that the run-it-back philosophy winds up being the perfect one?
First, let me say this. If his first name was Alanis, would it be Alanis Antetokounmpo or Alanis Antetokounmpo? Which would it be?
Well, I would have thought...
There's a whole variation you could go there, right?
I would have thought it would have been Alanis, but you've told me that there's 3 potential pronunciation, only one of them is correct.
Eddie goes with Alanis, right? I go with... I'm
Yes,
Team
Alanis.
Alanis, but apparently it's Alanis.
So it's a cross between what you're saying and what I'm saying.
In other words,
So
it's not
we're all
represented
half right
amongst-
here.
We're all half wrong, I think, actually. I think it's
a philosophical argument there.
Glass half full, glass half empty. Come
in
on.
terms of the Pacers and the East, my philosophy is this. There are 2 ways to look at it. If you're a team that's right on the cusp, and I'll go with precedent here, okay? If you're a team like the Pacers were in 98, and you're right on the cusp and you push the Bulls to the brink, and then you tweak things by increasing the minutes for Jalen Rose and backing down Reggie Miller a little bit, and internally you make some changes, but because you were right there and you knew that you were close, and so you didn't necessarily schematically you changed some things a little bit, but you didn't have to do it necessarily in terms of bringing in new pieces. In 94, the Pacers, when they went to the Eastern Conference Finals kind of out of nowhere and went up against the Knicks, and they realized there was an area where they did need to improve, and that was point guard play. So they went out and they acquired Mark Jackson because they saw that they were there, but there was a gap for sure. And they were young. This particular team, to me, because they are so young, Jimmy, feels like their move has been made in terms of Pascal Siakam, and that still is kind of gelling together. So there wasn't the need to go out and acquire a bunch of pieces as reactionary moves. You stay the course where you are and have trust in the fact that your roster is good and young enough that its improvement comes organically as opposed to externally. Whereas Philly, New York, they felt like they had to go out and get those pieces. I think there's a danger in being reactionary to it, and we've seen that with this franchise. Going out and making a move for Evan Turner or signing Andrew Bynum, those things were chemistry imploding moves as opposed to staying the course.
Does it matter
I
that
think
those were mid-season moves?
Yeah, that's certainly a factor. I mean, to your point, that's fair.
I'm not saying that should change anything philosophically from a philosophical standpoint, but overall philosophical standpoint, that's a tough one. But I mean, from the aspect of where the team was at that point, because you're right, this feels different than say the 2010-2011 season where you lose to the Bulls in 5, and you knew there were still areas that your roster had to have a full 180 on. You bring in David West in that offseason. You bring in other pieces that are ready for where you lose to Miami in the conference semis the next year, but you feel like the core's right. And then you take Miami, of course, to 7 the following season and lose. But you could see what was building there.
Right.
And it happened in a ladder-like format where each season it's a rung better. Whereas this year, it's straight to the top, and now it's...
When you make a mid-season move like they did for Siakam,
sure,
you run that risk. But clearly in that case, once it came together, you saw they were pretty good, right?
Yes.
And so the missing 10% for Indiana, 15%, whatever it might be, to me, I stick with the known commodity and I let it mature. And I hope that missing 15% comes from the 5% growth of Ben Shepherd, the 5% growth of Andrew Nembhard, the 5% growth of Tyrese Halliburton from last year to this year just through the natural process. And so I stay the course and stick with this group. I think they've played it the right way and let everybody and put blinders on as to what's going on around. Now, for Philly, as I mentioned yesterday, my thing with Paul George would be where I have concern about Philly from an opposition standpoint is this is the first time that Paul George has walked into a situation where he knows going into it that he does not have to be the one or the two, and that he is a complementary piece. And I think there were times in the past that Paul George thought he was an alpha, and he's not. He's not a Batman. He's a Robin, and he's a really good Robin, don't get me wrong. He's a Batman for 80% of the game until the final 20% comes down, and then I don't think he had it in him to be the take-over game, give me the ball kind of guy. Not a knock on him. He's a wonderful talent and a versatile talent. But I think he will really blossom in a situation where when the game's on the line, he's option 3 as opposed to option 1 or 2. I think that benefits him for certain. So that, from my standpoint, of the teams that are in the East that I think really improved, Philly is one of them. I think that's a substantial move for Philly. And then New York with Julius Randle coming in, but they also made some changes in terms of the roster that we'll see how that affects the actual chemistry or makeup of the roster.
I had a family member text me yesterday who's a diehard Pacers fan, and he brought up the following. And I want to preface it on the front end that I don't agree with this thought, but I know it's one that's in the Pacers fan base because I've seen it other places. Benedict Mathurin is still a very young player. He is still a player that is underneath some level of team control with a club option next year before he would hit restricted free agency. And of course, we can get into the weeds if we wanted to about extensions and all that. But my point is, he's a young player that still has high level upside. Is there any part of you that looks at this team where they're at right now and looks at Benedict Mathurin as a piece to where, Jake, I've been next to Kevin Bowen, I've been as adamant about my belief in him as anybody on this roster. But if you're one of the people that look at him and say, that's the best he is on defense, and I don't really know what his ceiling is offensively, but boy, maybe he has the highest value he's ever going to have right now at this stage of his career. Do you look at shopping him somewhere for a more immediate upgrade?
If there was a player that...
And I'm talking just him. Like
This is a huge year for Ben Mathurin.
It is.
Can I add something really quick here on this?
Mm-hmm.
If they do decide to part with Ben, it's going to be difficult.
I understand
just because
with the
of
salaries.
salary matching.
Correct. To
Matherin's
get
not
return on
making
investment. Right.
anything. And like the Pacers are a team that typically doesn't
Sure.
get too far into the luxury tax, so it'd be very challenging.
Let's just say then, for the sake of argument, again, I just want to ask the Matherin question of it. I realize the feasibility of it might not even be possible, but that has been a question of, if you're in win now mode or aggressive win now mode, there's been questions, and this is again just from a relative, but I've seen it in other spots of Benedict Matherin's value from a trade standpoint, maybe no higher than it's ever been. You'd probably have to move a Miles or somebody for it to be worth to wet your whistle from a salary match standpoint. But is it trust his development, or is it sell high on him?
I think it's, at this point, I think it's trust his development.
Yeah.
Now, I think you give it one more year to see where he molds. The hesitation that I have with Benedict Matherin, kind of at no fault of Benedict Matherin's, but when I was most impressed with Benedict Matherin was at the beginning of the season, especially in when he was watching him as a rookie, and his moxie and just his kind of unflappable nature. But he does strike me, and I really don't have, this is just strictly gut feel. I have nothing to base this on. I don't have like some concrete spreadsheet in front of me. But he looks to me like he could be one of those guys that is certainly capable of giving you 32 in a game. And then you look at it and you go, but it's a game where we lost by 18. In other words, I don't know how to word this, and people feel free to text or tweet me and tell me if this makes no sense at all, because I don't really have anything other than an eye test to equate this towards, and it's not a knock on him in any way. But it feels to me like if you were to look at the Pacers roster and say, which guy's best game comes the most at the cost of getting away from the cohesiveness of the way everything else moves, which guy would that be?
Guy?
It feels like him. It feels like Matherin, when he's going, it goes one of two ways. Either he's the piston that fires and takes more oil than everybody else, or he's the piston that just doesn't fire and is replaced within the engine. But he doesn't. That's not a knock on him. It just feels like his game is very catered towards independent play as opposed to within the flow of an offense.
The simple way of saying it is that he's an isolation player and that it kills what the Pacers want to do from
I
spreading
think that's
the floor.
fair, yeah.
And I get that. And that was, again, what my relative had mentioned on that regard offensively, a knock against him. My counter to that is the Pacers play a beautiful brand of basketball. The high-intensity offense, the ability of having, even though you have clear hierarchy of who is the guy, the idea of having a sum-of-your-parts style attack that any given night you could have somebody else that's going to go off or contribute for you. But there were stretches, both against New York and against Boston, where maybe it's the old basketball fan in me. I wanted an isolation takeover guy. I wanted somebody that would just go get theirs. And I think he's shown he can do that. And I think that if it can be combined, Jake, where it's asked for in spurts, if he can have full flow in the Pacers offense, but when called upon, he can go get his own, I think that's something that was drastically missing from their punch-out attack at times against New York and most notably against Boston.
By the way, did you bring in the year-old spotted cow that you have?
It is in the fridge.
Eddie, did you bring in the more recent spotted cow that you have?
Yeah. I'm hoping they're still in the fridge. We do have some.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a good point.
people around
With
here.
it being a holiday weekend, I thought this would be a good way for us to provide a service to everybody to let them know if beer goes outdated.
Sure.
Like the new old taste test.
Yes.
we need a fourth person in this to pour them out so we don't know which one is which.
Okay, so should I get one of the kids from across the hall to come do it, and then we'll do it, and we'll let everybody know?
There's always that, or
To kick off our
it could
happy
just
hour.
be you
Now
two
that
and I
happy
can
hour is
do it
legal,
and
are we
dish it
kicking
off.
off 2 o'clock happy hour on the show?
I'm
Oh,
down.
yeah.
All right. I'll go see if I can rally somebody up to come take part in our and we're just doing taste tests, folks. Don't get too excited. Is this beer skunked or good, right? Skunk beer tastes like Moosehead, though.
He obtained the spotted cow, but it took some chaos during the break. One of Eddie's bottles, I think, are actually
We
missing.
can't
Yes.
look.
Once one of my bottles were stolen,
So we have an investigation to
So
send.
here's what we're
which
doing.
does not surprise me. It's been in there for a month.
That's
to
why you need an
prepare
HR
people
department.
for the Independence Day weekend, what we're doing is this. If you have beer sitting around that's been around for a while and you're worried about whether or not it goes bad, we have here a spotted cow provided by Jimmy that is old and a spotted cow presented by Eddie, which is newer and fresh. Now, Wes Woodward, our friend from WIBC in the newsroom, has come over to provide as kind of the, if you will, independent counsel in all of this. So what we've done is we have poured into cups the old beer and the new beer. Wes has overseen this, and he knows which is which and is going to distribute them to us without us knowing which is which, okay, is the way that we're doing this. So basically, we're going to blindfold ourselves, Jimmy. Now, Jimmy, your beer is how old?
It was purchased in September of 22.
Okay, and so 2 years old. Well, not quite 2 years old, but you've had it almost 2 years.
Yep.
Eddie, yours is how old?
When you went to Milwaukee with Shannon last trip, whenever that was.
Okay, so a couple of months, basically.
Yes.
So we will begin with you, Jimmy. I need you, Wes, without Jimmy looking. Jimmy, please look in the other direction and or cover your eyes. Wes, I need for you to present to Jimmy one of the new ones, which would be the ones out of the bottle is the old and the can is the new.
No.
Other way.
Okay,
Bottle is new, can is old.
gotcha. So go ahead and present to Jimmy one of the two, but don't tell him which it is, Wes, if you could. One of the two to Jimmy and allow him to take a taste test. And then also give one to me, okay?
Are we doing the same time, or are we?
Sure. So go ahead and take your first sip, okay? Okay. I've got my first sip down. Do you?
Yes,
I'm glad I
and-
can
and
contribute
now-
with beer and not get any.
Now, Wes, you are aware of whether or not we are tasting, without saying it, you're aware of which one that we are tasting, correct?
Correct.
And did we both just taste the same?
No.
Okay. Excellent.
Ooh,
Excellent. Well done
interesting.
by Wes. Okay, now that you have that one, Jimmy, you just drank either the new or the old. We don't know which. Now,
Yep.
Wes, I need for you to present to both of us the second then of these. Theoretically, these are going to be different. We're going to try to determine which we are having. Okay. So here we go. This is sample
you.
number 2. We'll see if it tastes any different.
Again, I'm glad I can provide beer
Trying
and
to
not
cleanse
get
the
any.
palate. Well, you get to finish off all of it.
Oh, let's go.
I'll be honest. It tastes pretty similar to me. They taste pretty similar to me.
It does taste close.
I'm going to say that I went old and then fresh. Jimmy, what is your guess on what you did there? Are you saying you went fresh and then old?
I think I went fresh and then old.
Okay. Wes Woodward of WIBC, you are the man that has distributed these. In terms of, we will begin with Jimmy. The first one that he got was which?
He got the can
Oh, wow.
for both.
So we got the same thing.
Yes.
Well, then there's no way for us to know, right? Okay.
I'm confused with just.
So Jimmy here. Well, he duped us.
Well, I figured that might happen.
So
but
here's
I wanted to see if you guys, if you
the
thing.
thing. So I need you to taste that,
The
Jimmy.
same or not?
Taste mine and tell me if it tastes any different than what you had, because now we know. So you had.
See now it's
It's tainted.
it's the
Come
whole,
on,
the whole thing
Wes.
is tainted. But I would say that this tastes better than what I had. Yes, but it's
Okay, so now the can was the old or the new,
the can was the old.
and he had.
I was given both old. I was given both cans.
Both cans. You were both bottles originally.
Okay, so you, Jimmy, you got the fresh on the second half, and
Yes.
you're saying that it does in fact taste better.
I think it does taste better, but again, it's undercut now
All right,
because
now give me one of the cans here and let me taste an old.
Okay.
Since I've had only new. Let me taste an old and I'll tell you if it tastes any different. Here we go. Okay, I'm gonna try this out. This is the old. I've already had the new, and this is the old,
Yep.
right? Okay, here we go. Yes, the old tastes more, almost soury, right?
yeah, I'd agree.
difference in the packaging though with bottles and
Well,
cans?
that's also a good question between the bottle and the can packaging, but I don't think so because New Glarus.
Somebody call
is-
Joel A. Erickson. Get him on the line.
Jimmy, was yours in the fridge the entire time?
It had been in the fridge the entire time.
Not here, but
Yes, at home. Yes,
At
it was.
stored,
It
okay.
was, yep.
Wes, you want any beer?
I'm good.
what the heck is this?
Eddie, here we've got for Eddie. You got 2 cans and a bottle in here,
Look
Eddie.
at you, Eddie.
You're good to go, right?
Oh yeah.
So just so people know, no children or animals were harmed during this segment. And if you are watching on the YouTube channel in the break room, we appreciate it. You can see that we each took 1 sip of beer. So we are not compromising our professional integrity nor our safety on the program. But we will talk a little NBA. We'll get back into that conversation. We'll do it from a national perspective, as a matter of fact, and we will do it next. Big plans for tomorrow, Jimmy?
Yeah, we usually get together with my sister-in-law, my wife Haley, her sister, and her husband, their 2 kids. They usually have a big neighborhood 4th of July party on their little cul-de-sac. So we'll probably go over there, maybe swim for a bit, and then there just happens to be a ton of family in town on my side too. So we'll probably get together throughout the weekend. Plenty of good parties. How about yourself? Any?
No real plans. The bummer being that I think the weather's supposed to not be good, right?
Yeah. I mean, the rain chances are still what they are, but hopefully it's one of those rainy days where it's like only during like the morning and then it's good in the evening. That's obviously ideal for fireworks, but yeah, hopefully it's not a raining all day thing type of deal.
Matt Moore joins us on the program now. He is in the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. He is an NBA writer for Action Network and joins us to talk not only about the Pacers, but some of the moves in the East. Matt, let's begin with this. Your Independence Day plans for tomorrow are what?
I am slow cooking ribs on the grill for many, many hours, and then my town does a very big fireworks display over a lake that we'll head down to.
Nice. Nothing wrong with that. See, I'm all for the community fireworks show. I get a little tired of the neighborhood pyro that decides he's going to set off mortar bombs for 9 straight hours, right?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, especially for folks who got dogs. And better than that, I got a lot of veterans in the family, and they're not big fans of that either. So I try and be pretty respectful of that.
No, I understand. Absolutely. Let's begin with this. We were just discussing this, and I want the national perspective, and I appreciate your ability to offer that to us. To me, it is clear that the Indiana Pacers looked at the offseason, both contractually, or salary cap standpoint wise, but also just in terms of their roster, and said, we made the big move to get Pascal Siakam. We retained him, and now we're going to let this thing grow organically and take our chances that for now is going to be enough, and that the improvement is going to come from within as opposed to having to go out externally and make moves like other teams. Is that going to be enough to allow Indiana to sustain the level of competitiveness we saw in the last 10% of the season?
Probably not, to be perfectly honest, just in terms of, I think if you look at from a regular season standpoint, team's still going to be awesome. They're going to be one of the best offenses in the NBA. I got a lot of faith in this offense and what it looks like and how it plays. And it's one of the reasons I really liked them in the playoffs because I just kept saying, look, they're never going to get off their game. You're never going to slow them down. And that proved to be true. Everybody was like, well, their offense will peter out versus the Knicks or the Celtics. And even in the sweep, no, the offense is fine. But the problem is on the defensive end. And I just don't know that they're going to be able to get enough internal improvement on the defensive end because I think Rick Carlisle tried really hard last year to get them to commit and to be able to adhere to the principles that are necessary to be a good defense. And they weren't able to do it. In part, I just think because they're young. Maybe more continuity helps. Maybe just being together more and that better communication. I don't think they'll be worse than last year. They might be able to jump up. And if they jump up just a little bit, that's probably good enough for them to still be very competitive and have another shot at the conference finals appearance. But you would like to see them at least look to have added some defensive help there to be able to upgrade. But I don't think it was really possible this summer with where the market was at. That may have to be an in-season move. I think that by the end of next season, they might be much closer to the team that you want them to be. But I think for the first part of the season, they're going to look very much the same. Great offensive team, can't stop anybody.
Matt, out of the gate, Rick Carlisle had been asked where the struggles were defensively and how the Pacers on the whole could get better. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but his comments were something along the lines of, we don't need to be elite. We just need to be average. You bring up continuity and playing together once again for a full season. And at this point, what would be a full season with the likes of Pascal Siakam and hopefully no injuries to Benedict Mathurin. But with what this team does so well offensively, is just average attainable for them? And would that suddenly catapult them into I know they were just a conference finalist, but there were injuries, but would that suddenly catapult them into the conversation of no, this is a team that could get back there if they're just average defensively?
Yes, look, I think the best way to kind of put this is the Nuggets won in 2023 with the 17th ranked defense schedule adjusted. And that was the first time that we've really seen a team that was that bad defensively win a title and in a long time. And I think that that's possible now because – and we saw this in the finals too where Dallas's defense was great in the finals, but their offensive floor wasn't high enough because they spent so much energy on the offensive end. And we saw that the year before where the Heat's defense was actually really good versus Denver, but their offensive floor was too low. The Pacers' offensive floor to me is one of the highest in the league. Like, you're just not going to slow them down. And we've seen this time and time again, and we saw it in playoff series. So if you can just get to decent, that opens the door for the right series of matchups to be able for you to make it back to a conference finals. But my problem is once you hit that conference finals and once you're facing teams at that level, you've got to be good enough to actually solve problems. And they really struggle with that issue. They've got to get to where they can actually solve defensive issues. It doesn't mean that you have to be locked down. You just can't get absolutely crushed by various actions. A lot of this comes down to Tyrese Halliburton, who's going to have to once again be one of the best offensive players in the league. I think he was underrated in that and proved that in the playoffs last year, but he's going to have to be better on the defensive end. He's going to have to sustain the energy and effort. He's got to be better, but that's maybe the upside is guys like him, guys like Nembhard, they've now been through a playoffs and have seen like, oh man, like they will absolutely tear us apart if we're not locked in defensively. So if they learn from that lesson and they carry that forth into next season, that provides maybe some upside to get them to passable, even if good isn't possible yet with where they are as far as being young and with the personnel that they have on hand.
When you consider the, so far through free agency plus the draft and just any natural attrition as it is, the Eastern Conference team that has most improved or helped themselves, obviously on paper, since the end of last year is who?
I mean, I'll go with the Sixers. I think it's close between the Sixers and the Knicks. I think you look at those two teams. I want to see what Cleveland does, to be perfectly honest with you, because I don't think that they're done making moves. I think that they're still talking about making – there's a 3-team trade that's been discussed with the Pelicans and the Kings that could upgrade them. There's been talks of whether or not Darius Garland's going to go. No, I don't think Darius Garland wants to leave Cleveland, but I'm not sure his representation feels the same way. We'll see what they do. But, look, Sixers got Paul George. And Paul George, by the end of that contract, it's going to be an albatross. It's going to be a problem for them to deal with. But for next year, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George is the connector, Joel Embiid. You bring back the various pieces that they have. You get Eric Gordon. Losing Batum is not great, but it's not terrible. They've got enough pieces there to be able to make a serious run in the Eastern Conference. They had times last year where I thought they were a serious threat before Embiid's injury, but I don't ever know if he's going to be healthy enough for them to compete. Knicks, look, that Mikal Bridges move is great, but it kind of duplicates what they already had. Having that redundancy helps versus the Celtics, but it doesn't help you versus the Sixers. And so I think that there's trade-offs with how they kind of approach things. The East, I think they added a lot of different pieces and the things kind of moved around, but there's still nobody that really kind of makes me go like, wow, in the Eastern Conference. It's really still kind of, look, if the Celtics are healthy and intact, that's still probably the team to beat.
Matt Moore is our guest. He covers the NBA nationally for the Action Network, and he joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Matt, I asked this to one of our local Pacers beat writers yesterday. We talked about it a little bit on the show today. I want to get your perspective from the national seat itself. There is a level, I think, amongst the Pacers fan base, as there should be, of puffing your chest out for the first time in a while and feeling like, man, maybe that the franchise has turned a quarter once again in a conference finals in a year where just being outside the play-in and being a 6th seed, I think, would have satisfied a lot of Pacers fans. And now they're on this run it back tour where you believe that Tyrese Halliburton's going to take another step forward, and you like the pairing with Pascal Siakam, and you think that Benedict Mathurin and Jarris Walker are going to have solid year 3s and year 2s respectively. But you outline the moves that were just made there that are in some extensions short-term moves, some long-term moves, but what Philadelphia's done, what New York did, another year of continuity with Antetokounmpo and Lillard up in Milwaukee, the Cavs being what they are. Based on what's happened so far this offseason, if locally the perception is, no, the Pacers should be back in the conference finals next year, nationally, has their hierarchy in these rankings changed at all based on them running it back and the moves that other teams have made?
No, I mean, I think the answer here is that I think the national perception would probably be that, hey, nice season for them, but they probably shouldn't have been there because of the injuries to the Knicks and the injuries to the Bucks. Now, I like them versus the Bucks anyway, and I thought they were not being given enough respect versus the Knicks, and I still think that's kind of the case. Like, the reality here is I like teams – this is what's weird, really weird. I look back at history. Teams that overperform expectation, the idea, the natural reaction is, oh, they're going to regress a little bit. History doesn't really say that. History says that if you overperform, it's mostly that the expectations were wrong And that team probably sets a new standard bar. So I think it's very possible the Pacers can actually make another run because I do not think people understand how good the offense is. I think people look at the numbers and they're like, oh, yeah, they're like a really cute, fun offense. Like, no, this is an elite offensive unit. In a time of great offenses, the Pacers are elite. And when you're that good on one side of the ball, that gives you a real chance. The Magic are kind of the flip point of that with their defense. So I think that the perception is, well, yeah, I mean, look, they made a run, but that was just because of circumstance. And they'll be still back down at the middle of the pack. And quite honestly, they may not put up 50 wins this year. They may not have a great regular season record. But I still think this team is exceptionally dangerous, and it's a team that I think you can believe in for the long term because they are building a pretty sustainable model. This is not a short-term play here. Their guys have a lot of runway. It would be nice if they had added something else, but there's time to do that in season, much like they did with Pascal Siakam. If they can continue to make those types of moves, I think the Pacers are just going to keep climbing closer and closer to being a real contender.
You bring up the injuries aspect that is going to be folly and used as ammunition against them throughout the course of next season, no doubt, because, they only got there because of the injuries that befell the Bucks and that were plaguing the Knicks towards the end of that series. I was one that was kind of saying the same thing about Boston. And I know that that's somewhat sour grapes because they won the title and history only largely is going to remember who won. But couldn't other teams be saying, even as dominant as they were in the regular season, couldn't other teams in the East be saying the exact same things about the Celtics where, yeah, look, they looked great in the regular season and yes, they hoisted the trophy, but look at the path that they went on. Like, this team is not insurmountable. Am I crazy for thinking that way, or is there some truth to it?
I think you're spot on. I think the best way to put this, it's been difficult because, like, look, the way I've kind of said it is they had one of the best resumes in NBA history last year. Like, you put seasons down, that's one of the best seasons we've ever seen. And you go, like, what team played that season? I was like, yeah, but that's contextual, you know? And, like, if we measure up the talent and the way that team plays and watching them night to night, and we compare it with the 2017 Warriors or the 96 Bulls, these teams that are at the very apex, they don't stack up. They're not a juggernaut. They're beatable. They happen to never really run into a team that had answers for them. And a lot of that's because of the injuries that you talked about. So the East, to me, is still open. The Celtics need to be the favorite. The Celtics need to be respected. Their consistency night to night doesn't get enough credit, where they don't have these nights where it's like, yeah, they just didn't have it. They just didn't really give the effort in there, and they just didn't look good. Boston looks good just about every single night. If they miss threes, they lose, but their effort is always consistently really great, and that matters. But they're also a beatable team. I don't think there's anybody in the East, in the league. Let's expand it. There's nobody in the league that's not beatable right now. That's the era that we're in, which I think opens the door for teams like the Pacers.
Matt Moore of the Action Network is our guest. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Matt, Jarris Walker is a fascinating player to me, not necessarily because of what he's done on the floor, but because of just kind of this almost wind of secrecy about him. The Pacers, at least outwardly, say that they still believe in their former lottery pick. I know that he just finished his rookie year, but that they think that the future is very bright. But yet there are supposedly some teams that have inquired about him. Is Indiana being coy close to the vest because they believe they have something that can be unleashed, or because they are still working through that process and want to not diminish his value by honesty?
I mean, I think in part some of this gets into he's probably available in the sense that so many teams are available, so many players are available, but the question is what, and not that Lauri Markkanen's a much better player. But, like, if you call up the Jazz will talk to you about Lauri Markkanen, but it's going to take a minimum of 4 first-round picks and other players just to start the conversation. Do you really want to give that up for Lauri Markkanen? Now, the Warriors might. But with Jarris Walker, I think it's like, look, we have a lottery pick of the second year who showed some flashes last year, probably has some upside, but we also have a deep enough team now to where we can kind of examine our options for what's the best way to get us to that next level. So I think you keep all options open, but I don't think that they're keen on it. There's different levels here in the market of the Bulls are desperate to move Zach LaVine. Very few teams are desperate to move their guys because nobody wants to move them at lower value. Walker, I think, is an opportunity of we don't need him. We like him. He might be a key player for us later. Let's always keep in mind like what the value is. And the other part of that is you always want to constantly evaluate what the market is, because every year that you get closer to that extension, you want to see, do I want to commit this money or do I want to move him, especially under this new CBA?
I realize this is a difficult question because the cap of it all tends to muck everything up. The Pacers, from a trade standpoint, would have to do a lot of salary matching for this to even be a conversation. But there's been Pacers fans and some of my relatives that are diehard Pacers fans that have brought up the fact that, yes, you're banking on Bennedict Mathurin continuing to take leaps forward, but perhaps his trade value would not be any higher than it is right now with him being on such a still rookie team-friendly deal and there being high upside potential for him as a player. So again, I know it's difficult to answer because they'd likely have to send a Miles Turner or something to get anything back of substance, and I don't think they do that. But Bennedict Mathurin as a player, when you look at him, do you see somebody that, the Pacers are right to continue to trust, elevating his game to being a Robin or being a high-level player in their offense? Or are they in a situation where if there weren't handicaps based on the salary cap, they should look to get higher value for him for a more win-now piece?
Yeah, I think the problem with a player like that is until you see what he's capable of, you want to be real tentative with those type of deals. I think you include him as a centerpiece in a deal for an absolute, maybe not superstar, but like real star. I don't think that this player fits with the Pacers necessarily, but if the Heat start taking offers for Jimmy Butler, okay, all right, let's. If I send you Mathurin, what else do I get in this deal? Because it can't be Jimmy. Like, the money doesn't work,
right.
And you're trading a young player for a guy at the end of his career, right? But if that's like we would send you Jimmy Butler, Bennedict Mathurin's on the deal. Okay, what else is there that we can kind of add on to this? Does that make sense for us? That level of player, it's got to be a player that is going to boost you forward in the immediate next 2 to 3 years without long-term, this is going to become an all-albatross contract. And finding the guys that are of that ilk and caliber, but that also are going to be happy, satisfied, and engaged in Indiana, because that stuff matters too, is part of that equation. It's not enough to be good. You got to make sure the guys want to be there. And that's one of the reasons why I think the Pascal Siakam move was such a home run. Siakam is content and happy and engaged to be in Indiana. I think that's such a great fit. But you got to find guys a deal that would work along those lines. You can't deal Bennedict Mathurin because his value's high. It's got to be this value's high, so it allows us to make a real leap, and that's the only way I'd seriously consider it.
Matt Moore, Action Network, covering the NBA. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Matt, in conclusion, I went to high school and college with a guy named Matt Moore, who's a super cool dude and did well with the ladies. So if anybody ever asks you from Indianapolis, just roll with it. Just be like, yeah, that's me. You're good.
Hey, man, between that, the pitcher, and the quarterback, we're doing pretty well.
That's right. Hey, man, we appreciate it, all right?
Hey, you guys have a good 4th.
You
all
too,
right,
Matt.
Appreciate it. Independence Day tomorrow, as a matter of fact, and that makes it feel like a Friday, even though it's Wednesday. And so, since we're acting like it's a Friday, why not make it a Good for the Heart Friday? We will do that on the other side, and Debbie Antonelli joins us as well. because it does feel like a Friday. I don't know that I would necessarily, from a heart standpoint, recommend the deep fried chicken, but that's okay because it is Independence Day weekend, right? And because it's a Wednesday that feels like a Friday, it's time for a Good for the Heart Friday segment, special edition, if you will, because we will not be with you on Friday. We will be enjoying a 4-day weekend, as I hope many of you are as well. But I want to let you know going into the weekend that it's always important to talk about this. We do it each and every Friday, and that is simply making sure that you, men and women, especially if you are over the age of 40, but really for anybody, that you're taking care of the ticker, right? Making sure that your heart is in good shape. Heart disease continues to be the number one cause of death in men and women in the United States, but there is screening that you can do to help be proactive when it comes to your heart health, and it's available right now from Franciscan Health. We love Franciscan Health for the fact that they are number one in Indiana for interventional coronary care and major cardiac surgery by CareChecks. And also, they offer the affordable heart scan for just $49. You can self-refer, pay out of pocket, and get a free heart health risk assessment included with every single screening. It is very important to get that scan done, especially if you are somebody who has had a family heart history like I had that is not necessarily good when it comes to your heart, or if you have a weight issue or a previous or current smoker. But just in general for everyone, I highly recommend it because it's non-invasive and it allows you to see whether or not you have a blockage building within the arteries of your heart. And you do not want to go through the situation that I did when it comes to having a 100% blockage heart attack. But if you are in that situation, I would encourage you to call 911 and then, of course, get the best health care when it comes to Franciscan Health, because they are number one, as I mentioned, when we're talking about coronary care in the state of Indiana and interventional care as well for your heart. Now, we do this each and every Friday, a story that jumped out at me, and I said, you know what, that made my heart feel good. And today we'll do it on a Wednesday because we're not here on Friday. But the Indiana Fever were just in Las Vegas, as we know, taking on the Las Vegas Aces. They found out, as a matter of fact, the Fever did, just prior to that game, that they have not one, not two, but three members of the franchise that will be representing Indiana in the WNBA All-Star Game. That would be Kelsey Mitchell, that would be Aaliyah Boston, and that would be Caitlin Clark, who is part of our feel-good, good for the heart Friday on a Wednesday. Caitlin Clark played at Iowa. I think most of you know that. And while playing at Iowa, she was teammates with Kate Martin, very good friends with her, as a matter of fact, who is now in Las Vegas representing the Aces. During the time that they were together in Iowa City, they got to know and met Bailey Lux, a 14-year-old girl in Iowa that, like most of us, is just somebody that enjoys being on social media, playing video games, watching her beloved Iowa Hawkeyes. We all have our favorite team, right? But life was challenging and has become challenging for Bailey because Bailey Lux lost her mother to cancer. As a matter of fact, her mother passed away last January, I believe it was, and then Bailey was diagnosed with cancer in September of 2022. And she's a diehard Iowa fan who just wanted to be like other kids, and she got that diagnosis actually before her mother passed away. Her mother, Renee, passed away of ovarian cancer in January, and Bailey actually thought that at that point, even though she had lost her mother, that she also had lost cancer because she thought she was being cancer-free, that she had become cancer-free. She was able to ring the bell a month after her mother passed away after receiving cancer treatment in the state of Iowa and going through all of the things. And you can imagine the rigor, the mental anguish, and everything that she had to go through. But she stayed the course. She stayed strong. She stayed optimistic. And in the capacity of undergoing her treatments, and through the Ronald McDonald House in Iowa City, she eventually was able to meet her heroes, talking about Kate Martin and, as well, Caitlin Clark. And they formed a friendship, which is what life is all about, of course. Sometimes it doesn't matter how old you are. Sometimes it doesn't matter what sort of things you might have an interest in. It's simply a human connection that comes when you have the common goal. And in this case, it was the common goal of making sure that Bailey was a healthy, happy girl that had the goal of being able to overcome the terrible illness. Unfortunately, it did come back, did the illness. Bailey is still getting treatment in the state of Iowa. but she had a dream to be able to again see Bailey and Caitlin play. And they said, you know what? Or excuse me, to see Caitlin and Kate Martin play. And Kate Martin said, you know what? Let's do it in Las Vegas. So arrangements were made for Bailey Lux to be able to fly privately because it would be difficult because she's now in a wheelchair to go through a commercial airline. And so Bailey Lux was able to meet her heroes once again. She presented Caitlin Clark with a photo album that she had accumulated, not only of pictures of the times that they had been together in Iowa, but also in following the career of both players. She was presented with an Indiana Fever jersey. She was made an honorary member of the Fever, and she and Caitlin Clark both joked that they would make sure that they didn't let Kate know that secret of the fact that she was betraying, perhaps, or betraying her beloved Las Vegas Aces as well, because I understand why she would have two favorite teams. But in the end, the reality is this. Caitlin Clark, the Indiana Fever, and the Las Vegas Aces, competitors last night on the basketball floor, but they came together for a common cause, which was brightening the day of young Bailey Lux once again. And they made her feel special, they made her feel important, and most importantly, they let her know she's part of a team with the bigger goal. And afterwards, Bailey talked about the special meeting with both teams and with Caitlin Clark.
Honestly, it was a really fun experience, and I really miss Caitlin. Just felt good to see her again and be back in her presence again.
Win on three. 1, 2, 3.
That is the Indiana Fever team. That is Bailey Lux, courtesy of the Indiana Fever on their website yesterday, creating a win and doing it for Bailey. The lesson is simply this, folks, and it's very simple, and that is you never know when you might be able to touch the lives of somebody else or even a young person that is simply looking for a glimmer of hope throughout their day in what might otherwise be a journey of darkness. But in the case of Bailey, you can tell that she finds light and finds that hope in many different areas. And we are grateful to Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever that they were able to assist in that last night in making her feel better. And we wish her, of course, the best of luck throughout her journey on this Good for the Heart Feel Good Friday, even though it is a Wednesday. So with that, speaking of the Fever and what happened on the court last night, we bring to the program somebody who actually probably is not aware of the fact was a feature in terms of our Good for the Heart Feel Good Friday a few weeks ago, Debbie Antonelli, because we talked about her efforts in helping out people not only at Clemson University, but getting that introduced for those who have had challenges at the university level. And we talked about Debbie and her efforts at the University of South Carolina and Clemson and other schools. North Carolina State, actually, one of those. But she joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, and the longest introduction in the history of radio. Debbie, first off, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Hey, great to be with you guys. Thank you for inviting me back.
Let's begin with this, just in terms of, and I don't know, necessarily that you might have seen the interaction between Bailey Lux and Caitlin Clark, but I think sometimes, Debbie, we lose sight when we talk about the competitive nature of athletics, professional sports, that you're still dealing with people that are humans and their ability to understand the impact that they can have in brightening the lives of others. And I thought it was a special moment between, Bailey and Caitlin Clark, and I'm assuming that this is also not something, this is the one that we know about, but this goes on a lot between professional athletes and young people.
Yes, I did get to see the interaction with Bailey and the Indiana Fever team at shoot-around when Caitlin presented a bag of Fever gear, and Bailey's smile just lit up the entire arena. You're right. These stories happen a lot. And, when I'm watching Bailey, she's not just a source of motivation and inspiration. She was actually included in the whole process yesterday by both teams. So you can be a symbol of inspiration, or you can actually feel like you're a part of what's happening. And both teams, especially Kate Martin and Caitlin Clark, made Bailey feel like she was a part of everything that was going on that day around one of the greatest attended games we've ever seen in the history of the WNBA. It was pretty special being in there, and Bailey made it more special.
And so the game itself, Las Vegas, obviously we know how good they are, both as a franchise and the following, right? I mean, a pretty rabid following for that. To me, and I know that that's a game that the Fever coming off of, a big win against Phoenix in particular and getting a win over a team with a 500 record, things are trending in the right direction, and you can see the progress. But for you, Debbie, as somebody who watches them game in and game out, play by play, what has been the thing that is different now other than schedule from the beginning of the year for this team?
I think a lot of people use the word struggle when they talked about Caitlin and her adjustment. I've only used the word adjustment. I don't think there's really been a struggle for her at all. She's adjusted. She's like somebody who calculates the next play, almost not robotic-like, but so high IQ that if she makes a mistake, she usually doesn't make the same mistake twice. And Aaliyah Boston was another that had to adjust to the pace of the game, playing in the short roll, playing facing up in the middle third, having decision-making qualities facing up the basket, not with her back to the basket like she did at South Carolina. And I think it was just a different role for her as well. But you can see when the two of them are connecting and clicking, and, you know, the way Christy Sides runs her offense, when you run two shooters to the deep corner and you have to guard them, it opens up the middle third, and that's where Caitlin and Aaliyah have been able to make a lot of damage. And then Alyssa Smith is really rebounding the ball well. And Fag Benlay coming back is going to help them in their rotations. And, you know, Katie Lou Samuelson was brought to Indiana to more be a 3 than a 4, but because of injuries and things, she's been playing more of a 4. But she's got to start knocking down some shots, and she's not the only one. They got to finish around the rim better. There's a few things that are fixable, but it's nothing that is like dire straits. They can fix all the issues that they have.
Debbie, I asked you this last time we spoke in the countdown to the Olympic break and the well-deserved rest, while it also being kind of a, you know, another mini camp, if you will, but happening mid-season with the Fever being able to, again, get the much-needed rest and then refocus their efforts for the final half of the season and change. Since that conversation, that was in the midst of a 4-game winning streak. They've lost 3 of their last 4 in varying degrees. They were in that game in Chicago. I mean, they've been there in these contests, but it's been another case of what the season's been at times, which is up and down, trying to find their footing. What do you want to see out of this group over the final 5 and change before the Olympic break?
I think maturity is a process, and I think they're going through that right now. And I think as long as they continue on the next play and not worry about the end result, if you start feeling the pressure of the playoffs, I think that can reverse or inversely affect a team, especially a young team. But we've seen games like, to your point, you know, they're not closing out games where Vegas is up 6 in the fourth quarter and they start the fourth quarter and they close the door. You know, they just have that veteran presence about them, and they have confidence about them, and they know where their shots are going to come from. Asia Wilson is a star amongst stars, but she's going to get the ball. And I think that's the next level for Indiana. They can go through and run their sets and execute, but then when you get to the very end of the games, it has to be no game slippage, perfect execution, right people taking right shots from the right spots on the floor so that it can affect the other parts of the game as well. And, you know, I think that's the next thing that's coming for them, and that takes time as well. But getting into practice, when they go through a shoot-around, look, Christy Sides and her staff do an excellent job preparing. They have personnel. They have schemes based on personnel. They have out-of-bounds plays and situational offense based on certain situations in the game. They're doing their part. The players have got to continue to execute and make plays, and you got to shoot the ball with confidence. And at this point, as a professional, if you're not making shots, there's 2 things. It's either muscle memory and the ability to self-correct. You've got to figure that out and get in the gym and start knocking them down, because there are open shots that they are missing, and if they make those open shots, I think we're talking about a different team.
Debbie, when you have a team that is young and learning cohesiveness, how challenging is it to keep to integrity of system? In other words, to not give into the temptation to start changing things, but rather say, this is the style that we're going to run, and this is what's going to work once everybody gets on the same page, and sometimes that simply takes time when you have new faces. Is it difficult to stand by that and continue to execute it day in and practice in and game out?
I think we're always looking for validation, right? Is this work? Does this going to happen in this situation? Can we make this effort here? I think you're constantly looking for validation in what you're doing and how you're running it. And I think Indiana has what they need to be able to be a playoff team. So, you know, there's some players that are so creative off the bounce that they can break off the play anytime and break it off early in the offense, which might affect their ability to offensive rebound and then get back in transition. whereas maybe you'd rather have the ball in Caitlin Clark's hands at the end of the shot clock or Kelsey Mitchell at the end of the shot clock because they can just get a bucket. They can make a play. I think those are the things that start to evolve as the season progresses, where people start to understand the roles, understand who can do what, when and where, and manage the game in that manner. And that's not on the coaches. That's a fourth quarter situation where players have got to be a little bit more savvy, if you will, about who should be doing what in those times in the games.
We talk so much about Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, obviously Kelsey Mitchell named to the All-Star team as well. But give me a player or two that you watch and you think to yourself, that is somebody whose contribution may not be, the proverbial box score contribution, and they're not getting talked about on sports talk radio, but what they're doing is really critical and they're doing their part really well and they deserve more credit than they're getting. That player for the Indiana Fever is who?
Fag Benley, the 6'4", fourth-year player who, has been injured and been in and out of the lineup. Now she's got a thumb issue she's dealing with and finishing around the rim and catching the ball. I think Fag Benley, because she runs, she's active, she's long, she can blow up ball screen coverages, which means you can run any scheme. You can only under, overhead, trap, ice jam, switch, drop, the 8 different variations on a ball screen. And she can manage all of those if necessary. Now, Indiana doesn't need all those. Quite frankly, nobody needs all those in the W. But I think Fag Benley, because she does a lot of things that do not show up in the stat sheet. When she runs ahead of the ball, she drags the defense with her to the rim, and that opens up the top of the floor for Caitlin and Aaliyah to have more room and more space to operate. There's a lot of things that can happen when you're converting from defense to offense. If you have a player like Fag Benley who can score in transition, can catch it on the block in a one-on-one and finish, or on the defensive end, in any scheming or coverage that Christy Wallace wants her team to play based on personnel, she can guard it because she can guard people on the perimeter with her length and quickness. So she's the one I think that will be a big difference after the Olympic break.
Fever television analyst Debbie Antonelli is our guest. She's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Before we let you go, Debbie, I have a dilemma that I ran past Eddie and Jimmy yesterday, and then I realized I probably need a female perspective and a female vote here. Now, are you willing to partake in this experiment that I've got here and this dilemma that I've got and give me your advice on the radio?
I think we're fast friends. Sure, I can help.
All right,
out.
here we go. So, beginning of the year, back in March, I get an email from a family member who has seats at one of the music venues here in town, and they say, hey, are any concerts you want me to set aside tickets for? So I run it past my girlfriend, Shannon, and she says, oh, I really like Alanis Morissette. I said, okay, great. So I said, listen, we'll take Alanis Morissette if available. Okay, great, I'll let you know. Great. And she has commented a few times how excited she is for that show. Understandable. That's kind of in our wheelhouse. So Shannon, mind you, born and raised, not raised, but born in Columbia, South Carolina, lived there till she was 9. I said to her the other day, I said, I've wanted to see Hootie and the Blowfish like 100 times. We just talked about it on the radio. Every time that they're in Indy, something comes up where I can't go. Literally every time. It's almost a running gag. So I said, why don't I just buy tickets for their show in Nashville? It'll be fun. We'll drive down. We'll have a dinner in Nashville. We'll make a night of it. We'll go to the show. She said, sounds great. Love it. Perfect. So I bought tickets to Hootie and the Blowfish. The next day, she says, by the way, that Hootie and the Blowfish concert is the same night as the Alanis Morissette concert in Indianapolis. Now creates the dilemma. And at one point she said, no, it's fine. You go ahead and go to Hootie. She didn't say, we'll go to, she said, you go. So I know that she was okay with going to Hootie and was excited about it. And she has the South Carolina tie, which I'm trying to really lean on. But at the same time, she was also excited about Alanis Morissette. Tickets bought for Hootie. Tickets presumably going to be given for Alanis, although not yet confirmed. So that said, from a female perspective, Debbie, I need you to be the deciding vote. Which concert am I attending?
Oh, my gosh, this is so easy. I thought you were going to give me a hard one. You can tell her to have a great time at Alanis Morissette, and you'll see her after you get back from Nashville. You're going to Hootie, man.
So you're meeting me in Nashville, right? We're going to go and enjoy the show together and hang out and watch. All right. Well,
that took a turn. I did not expect that to go there.
I heard that Hootie puts on a great show, right?
It's the time of your life, man. You're going to be around thousands of friends that feel the same way about Darius, Mark, Dean, and Sony and their band. and Buddy, their bodyguard. Everybody knows those guys. They're regular guys. You know, they're fun guys. They're talented, and they put on a great show, and they love playing together, and you can see it. You'll have a great time in Nashville.
And Alanis is going to be singing the whole time about how it's better to break up with your boyfriend. So, like, I think that probably Hootie's the safer play for me, right?
Well, no disrespect to Alanis, who I know is a Grammy Award winning, whatever, but I think you're going to have a lot more fun and be more energized at the Hootie.
All right. Well, there you go. I will let you know how it goes next time we chat. I appreciate it very much. Happy Independence Day.
You guys are great.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Debbie Antonelli joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. There we go.
I thought for certain.
And if you could send me that podcast, send it to Shannon. That'd be wonderful.
I thought for certain she was saying, Jake, this is easy. You follow your lady. And
No.
but it turned. It took a sharp right.
That was awesome. All right. Well, there we go. The jury is in, right?
I think it's more important now that you had three men on your side. Now you have 3 men and a woman.
I think Shannon understands that's where I want to lean, but she doesn't want to say it. I don't know. I do feel bad, though. But Alanis Morissette, 2 days before that, going to be in Cincinnati. And I'm still to me, that's the ultimate compromise, is it not?
Sure. Yes.
That's the ultimate win for you.
Hey, we go down to Cincinnati on during the week, and then we go to Hootie on the weekend.
Is she a fan of car travel?
Well, it's only an hour. Yeah, because we go to Reds games almost every year. It's, an hour and a half, right?
Well, I meant adding on in 1 week.
No,
Cincinnati
that's
plus
true.
Nashville.
I mean, that is true. There is that factor, right? Of we just did this 3 days ago, and now here we are back, right? We'll come back. We will get Jimmy's plays of the day and get you set for the long weekend next.
It's a crazy sports weekend, so we'll go a little bit out of order here. We'll start first with baseball. We'll take once again, cute fella.
Hey, root for me.
The Baltimore Orioles to one of the money line over the Seattle Mariners. That at plus 105. The Yankees are reeling, and Ellie De La Cruz stole the show last night. I expect more of the same tonight, giving the Cincinnati Reds to an outright on the money line over the New York Yankees. Eddie, your baseball bets today.
Yes, I will be placing one wager. I will be taking the Phillies on the money line against the Cubs. Two aces going at it. Shota, I should say. Imanaga for the Cubs, Zach Wheeler for the Phillies. Both will be fantastic, but that Phillies bullpen will be better than Chicago's. That's why I'm taking the Phillies minus 118.
It is a weekend full of soccer, next couple days full of soccer, in fact. We'll jump around a bit. First, we'll stay stateside with Copa America. This is one to monitor because he's been battling injury, but assuming he plays, we'll take Argentina's Lionel Messi as an anytime goal scorer. Argentina's in a quarterfinal against Ecuador. Now we hop on a plane, head over to Germany for the Euros. First with Friday action, Spain versus Germany in the quarterfinals. We will take Spain to qualify. That means Spain to move on. Remember, if you bet these on the money line, it's only inside regulation. If it goes to extra time, you're screwed. So we'll take Spain to qualify. In the afternoon session, we will take France to qualify over Portugal. Now for Saturday, there's two matches. We're only playing one. England has looked vulnerable. Switzerland has looked sharp. We will take the Swiss plus 135 on the money line
sharp is a different
to qualify.
kind of cheese, right?
I know it is, to win outright. So Euros again, France, Spain, and Switzerland all to qualify. Those are your plays of the day. I would love to place a Nathan's hot dog eating challenge bet.
I was just
but
going to
Jake,
say.
I got to be honest, without Jaws himself, Joey
You never
Chestnut,
heard of any of these people, right?
I'd just be throwing a dart, so I'm going to abstain.
Isn't that one Stoney? Isn't there a Matt Stoney? Is that his name?
I'll take your word for it.
We've heard of him, right?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, yes. Very familiar with him, Jake.
He's going to eat 74 watermelon gummies and become the hero of Eddie Garrison.
That's
in
right.
Winning the competition, right?
He's going to get the munchies.
They
But
didn't list
we're
all
familiar with him, right?
I don't see him listed on the odds here, but it's gotten to the point where there's about 8 options to bet on and then just field. So that's where we're at with.
I honestly thought that deal was like a publicity stunt.
You mean the vegan wieners?
Yeah, no, that like Chestnut would end up being in it.
You thought he'd still be in it anyway?
Yeah.
Like Stone Cold Steve Austin entrance music?
Isn't he doing like some sort of?
He's doing a Netflix showdown pay-per-view with Kobayashi, I think, in the fall. But yeah,
Oh, so he's not doing it up again. I mean, how that would be the game.
It would have been crazy
right?
had it been up against it for sure. But no, you mess with the vegan wieners and then you get out of Nathan's hot dog eating contest. Just what happens.
The vegan wieners.
That's correct.
Okay, so guys, tomorrow and Friday, we will not be in. As a matter of fact, all shows off tomorrow and off on Friday. Hope everybody has a wonderful long weekend.
Happy 4th, everybody. Yeah.
Happy 4th indeed. Happy Independence Day. Happy celebration to everybody. Hopefully the weather cooperates and you are having fun with friends and family wherever you may be, that it turns out to be a great one. And we will talk to you Monday. Dwight Freeney going to join us, and John, as a matter of fact, on Monday. So we will do that. Brian Noy is up next for John, who is out. What's that?
No.
He gets mad at me because I say it wrong every time. And it's because I used to work with a guy whose last name is Noy, so I apologize.
Tom Noy? South
It
Bend
is
Tribune?
Yeah, and they're both from up in that area.
Correct.
And Brian No got really mad last time and kept saying, no. And I'm
Brands
like,
are an
my
important
apologies.
thing. Brian knows Brand is up there. With
And Brian's a
the best
good
of them.
dude.
He is.
And
He's a great guy.
he wrote a good article on me, and I'm very appreciative, so I apologize. Brian No is in next for John. We'll be back with you on Monday.